Born in 1732 in the quiet countryside of Virginia, George Washington's life unfolded during a time of great change. The American colonies, once small and dependent, were beginning to see a shift in their relationship with Great Britain. The story of George Washington is not just the story of one man, but the story of a nation coming into being. His life, from the fields of Virginia to the halls of power in Philadelphia and beyond, is intertwined with the birth of the United States, its struggles and its triumphs. In the early years, Virginia was a land of great beauty and promise, but it was also a land where the winds of revolution began to stir, and the young Washington, guided by his deep sense of duty, would come to play an essential role in shaping a future that was yet to be written. His early experiences in the forests and fields of Virginia would prepare him for the unimaginable challenges that lay ahead. Through trials, triumphs, and the weight of responsibility, Washington's journey was one of steady leadership, unwavering courage, and an unrelenting commitment to the ideals of liberty. His story spans decades, from his early days as young surveyor to his years as a military commander, and finally, as the first president of a fledgling nation. This is the story of George Washington, a man whose life defined the course of American history, shaping the path of a nation, and whose legacy endures through the generations. As you settle in for a restful night, let the steady rhythm of his life guide you through the pages of history. And as we begin this journey, may the quiet story of Washington's life bring you peace and calm, as we reflect on the birth of a nation and the man who helped to guide it. George Washington was born on February 22nd, 1732 at Pope's Creek Estate, a modest plantation in Westmoreland County, Virginia. His father, Augustine Washington, was a prosperous planter and landowner, while his mother, Mary Bull Washington, was a woman of great strength and determination. George's birth took place in the midst of a world that was just beginning to feel the stirrings of change. Virginia, a colony rich in tobacco plantations and deeply rooted in British traditions, was about to witness a revolution, not just in politics, but in the very essence of its identity. The Washington family's early years were shaped by the vast expanses of land in Virginia, where George spent his childhood in the rural comfort of the estate. However, his early life was not one of luxury. His father passed away when George was just 11 years old, leaving him to navigate the complexities of life under the guidance of his mother. Despite his father's wealth, George inherited only a small portion of the estate, which would be further complicated by the family's shifting fortunes. As a young boy, George was not one to seek academic recognition or accolades. Education in the Washington household was largely informal, and George's studies were a mix of lessons in basic subjects such as reading, writing, and arithmetic. However, his mother, Mary Bull, understood the importance of a strong moral and intellectual foundation. While George's formal education may have been limited compared to the sons of wealthier families, his character was shaped by the lessons of discipline and integrity that his mother imparted. As George grew older, he found himself drawn to the practical and the physical. One of his earliest pursuits was surveying, a skill that would later shape his future and provide him with a solid understanding of the land and the people. In the early 1740s, George learned the art of surveying from a neighbour, Lord Fairfax, a landowner with extensive holdings. This apprenticeship marked the beginning of a formative chapter in Washington's life. The work took him deep into the forests of Virginia, often venturing into rugged, untamed territory. In the process, George developed an intimate understanding of the land, which would serve him well both as a military leader and later as a political figure. Surveying in many ways shaped George Washington's character. The work required patience, precision, and an eye for detail, all qualities that would later become hallmarks of his leadership style. As he traversed the Virginia wilderness, measuring and marking the land, George also grew into a young man who understood the complexities of nature and the challenges of settling the vast frontier, surveying was not simply a job for Washington, it was a rite of passage. It exposed him to the wilderness and in turn allowed him to foster a deep respect for the land and its people. In 1751, at the age of 19, Washington's life took a significant turn when he travelled to Barbados with his half-brother Lawrence, who was suffering from tuberculosis. The trip was meant to offer Lawrence some relief, but it was also George's first journey beyond the shores of Virginia. During his time in Barbados, George contracted a severe case of smallpox. While the illness was life-threatening, it marked a significant moment in his life. His survival from smallpox left him with a lasting scar, but it also gave him a sense of resilience that would accompany him through the rest of his life. The Barbados experience, though marked by hardship, would later prove valuable. Washington's time away from Virginia gave him a broader view of the world, a world beyond the confines of Virginia's plantations. While he was not yet a man of great wealth or influence, Washington's journey deepened his understanding of health, survival, and the harsh realities of life during this era. Upon his return to Virginia in 1752, Washington began to focus on his future with a renewed sense of purpose. As a young man now familiar with the wilderness and equipped with the skills of surveying, Washington found himself more aware of the role of land ownership in colonial society. His inheritance from his father was modest, but it was enough to begin to lay the groundwork for a life that would soon take him into the world of public service. His first notable military experience came in 1753, when the Virginia governor, Robert Dinwiddie, sent Washington to the Ohio Valley as an envoy to the French forces who were encroaching on British territory. Washington's mission was to inform the French of the British claims to the region and to demand that they leave. Though Washington's mission was unsuccessful, it marked the beginning of his involvement in military affairs, a journey that would take him through many battles and hardships. In 1754, Washington found himself leading an expedition into the Ohio Valley, where he was tasked with building a fort at the strategic site of the French Fort Duquesne. The expedition ended in disaster, with Washington's forces being ambushed by the French and their Native American allies. Though the battle was a defeat, Washington's bravery and leadership during the retreat earned him recognition throughout the colonies. Despite the early setbacks, Washington's reputation as a leader in the military began to grow. The French and Indian War, which had already been raging for some time, would prove to be a crucial testing ground for Washington's military skills and resilience. It was during this time that he began to gain the experience that would form the foundation of his future leadership as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army during the American Revolution. Washington's early life in Virginia, marked by personal loss, physical challenges, and the formative experience of military service, prepared him for the difficult years ahead. He had learned valuable lessons about leadership, survival, and duty, and was now positioned to take on the weight of greater responsibilities in the shaping of his country's future. His early life was far from easy, but it was in these early years that Washington developed the character, resilience, and sense of duty that would carry him through the trials to come. This chapter of Washington's life, though quiet and understated, laid the groundwork for the man he would become. As a young man, he had already faced hardships and risen to meet challenges, and these experiences would remain with him throughout his life, shaping his destiny as one of the central figures in American history. George Washington's early life, though marked by personal loss and the challenges of a young man coming of age, was greatly influenced by the steadfast character of his mother, Mary Ball Washington. As a widow at the age of 35, she became the primary force in George's upbringing. Her strength, discipline, and sense of duty shaped his formative years, and her influence remained a constant throughout his life. Mary Ball Washington was a woman of remarkable resilience. After the death of her husband, she took charge of the Washington estate, managing the property and overseeing the well-being of her children. While George's early education was limited by the resources available to the family, Mary's guidance was never lacking. She instilled in him a sense of responsibility and the importance of perseverance, qualities that would serve him well in the years to come. Her methods were often stern, but they were rooted in a deep sense of love and commitment to her children. George's formal education was limited compared to that of wealthier boys of his time. As was common in Virginia's rural society, his schooling consisted of occasional tutors, lessons in reading, writing, and arithmetic, and much of his education came through self-study. His interests as a young man were practical rather than academic, focused more on subjects like mathematics, surveying, and the physical sciences. Yet, despite his lack of a formal education in the traditional sense, Washington's intellect was sharp, and he quickly grasped the lessons that would define his future. In particular, George was drawn to the study of geometry and mathematics, subjects that would later aid him in his work as a surveyor and military leader. Surveying was a skill that demanded precision, understanding of land, and the ability to navigate the natural world, qualities that Washington excelled in. The discipline required was one he deeply respected, as it demanded both focus and patience. His work in surveying across the rugged Virginia terrain exposed him to the challenges of the land and its people, sharpening his mind and expanding his understanding of the world around him. Despite his growing aptitude for practical subjects, George's formal schooling ended when he was about 15 years old. At that point, his mother's influence became even more significant. In addition to encouraging her son's intellectual pursuits, Mary Ball Washington emphasized the importance of character. She imparted lessons on humility, hard work, and a sense of duty to one's country, qualities that would become central to George's identity. In many ways, Mary's strong sense of virtue and discipline became the cornerstone of George's character, and as he grew older, he would often reflect on her role in shaping his life. By the time George reached his late teens, he was already a young man with the determination and poise necessary to embark on his own journey. His early years in Virginia, though somewhat isolated and marked by personal loss, had prepared him for the broader challenges that lay ahead. The seeds of ambition had been sown, not only through his intellectual growth but also through his exposure to the values that his mother had instilled in him. As George matured, his self-reliance grew, and he began to understand the power of leadership. However, it was not just his own leadership that began to take shape, but the realization that true leaders are those who serve their communities and their nations. Mary Ball Washington's teachings would follow George throughout his life, helping him through moments of crisis, doubt, and difficulty. While his formal education might have been incomplete, it was the values of self-discipline, integrity, and duty to a higher cause that Washington learned from his mother that guided him through the many roles he would take on in his life. Washington's mother, though she remained a figure of authority throughout his life, was also a quiet, constant force of support. She was a woman of few words, but her expectations and her faith in her son were unwavering. Despite her own hardships and the burden of raising children alone, she never faltered in her belief in George's potential. As he navigated the turbulent years ahead, the memory of his mother's strength would provide him with a deep sense of inner resolve. As George entered adulthood, he began to expand his horizons beyond the borders of Virginia. In 1749, at the age of 17, he received his first professional opportunity as a surveyor, working for the Fairfax family in the Virginia frontier. This job took him deep into the wilderness, where he spent months traversing the rugged lands of the Shenandoah Valley. While this time in the wilderness exposed him to the physical challenges of the land, it also gave George an appreciation for the beauty and vastness of America's untamed frontiers. The influence of his early education, coupled with his practical experiences in the field, began to shape Washington's worldview. The hardships and challenges of the frontier life made him both pragmatic and resourceful. He learned that the land itself could be both a sanctuary and a source of hardship, but through careful planning and leadership, it could be tamed and transformed into a powerful force for the future. As Washington's career began to take shape, he grew more involved in the social and political landscape of Virginia. In the 1750s, as tensions with the French and the British escalated, Washington was drawn into the military life. But it was not just his military service that defined his early adulthood. It was his ability to rise to challenges and to lead with a steady hand. He was quickly recognized for his calm demeanor and his strong sense of duty, traits that would come to define him throughout his life. The combination of practical education, lessons learned from his mother, and the formative experiences of surveying and military service allowed Washington to develop into the leader he would later become. Each challenge he faced only strengthened his resolve and further solidified the values that were instilled in him from an early age. Though George Washington would face many trials in the years to come, the foundation laid in these early years would provide him with the strength to meet the growing demands of leadership in the birth of the United States. As George Washington entered his late teens, his focus shifted toward the land. His early work as a surveyor would prove not only to be a practical means of livelihood, but also a crucial foundation for his future endeavors. Surveying, an occupation that required both physical stamina and intellectual precision, became the path that guided him away from the comforts of home and into the rugged, untamed frontier of colonial Virginia. In 1749, at the age of 17, Washington began his professional career as a surveyor. He was hired by the Fairfax family, one of the wealthiest landowning families in Virginia, to map out their vast properties in the Western Territories. This was no small task. Virginia was a sprawling, undeveloped frontier, a region that demanded an intimate understanding of the land's geography. Surveying was a job that required sharp attention to detail, a steady hand, and a keen sense of the land's potential, skills that Washington would refine over the years. The work of a surveyor took him deep into the wilderness, through dense forests and across vast expanses of uncharted land. At times he would trek for weeks, using only a compass, chains, and his knowledge of the landscape to mark boundaries and measure distances. The Virginia wilderness, both harsh and beautiful, presented unique challenges, and Washington faced them with the same discipline and determination that his mother, Mary Ball Washington, had instilled in him. The frontier was a place of isolation and uncertainty, but it also offered George an opportunity to cultivate independence and resilience. During these years, Washington's surveying expeditions introduced him to many of the complexities of Virginia's land ownership system. He learned how to navigate the intricate relationships between landowners, the colonial government, and the Native American tribes whose territories were at risk of being displaced. The skill of surveying also gave him a rare insight into the land itself, a skill he would later use to great effect during his military career. His work in surveying, while not immediately glamorous, helped him forge relationships with influential people in the colony, giving him a foothold in Virginia's political and military world. As he spent more time in the wilderness, George's character began to solidify. He learned the value of hard work, patience, and practicality. Surveying also instilled in him a respect for the land, as well as a deep awareness of the challenges settlers faced as they moved into the frontier. His time spent in the wilderness became formative, as it taught him not only about the land but also about the people who depended on it for survival. He witnessed firsthand the struggles of early colonists and their interactions with the Native American tribes, and these experiences would later inform his decisions as a leader. By the age of 20, Washington had become one of the most experienced and well-regarded surveyors in the colony. His reputation grew as he helped expand the Western Territories, marking and surveying lands that would later become crucial to the growth of Virginia and eventually the United States. The ability to map the land and understand its strategic value would serve him well in the years ahead. as he would use this knowledge to navigate the political and military landscapes during the American Revolution. But while surveying provided Washington with a steady income, it was not enough to satisfy his growing ambition. The young man from Virginia was beginning to understand that his future lay not just in the land, but in public service. As Washington's surveying career progressed, he began to see the value in cultivating relationships with the colonial elite. He started to participate in local politics and social events, using his connections to gain a deeper understanding of the colony's social and political systems. In 1752, George's life took another turn when he was appointed Adjutant General of Virginia's militia at the age of 20. His military career began almost by chance, yet it would come to define much of his life. Washington's position as Adjutant General was a significant step in his early career, though it came with a great deal of responsibility. The role involved organizing and overseeing the training of Virginia's militia, which at the time was poorly funded and inadequately prepared for the potential conflicts that lay ahead. While his surveying work had already exposed him to the complexities of colonial land disputes, it was his role in the Virginia militia that would introduce him to the harsh realities of military service. In 1753, only a year after being appointed Adjutant General, Washington was given a commission to deliver a message to the French forces occupying the Ohio Valley. This mission, which required him to travel into what was then the frontier, marked Washington's first foray into military leadership. Though the mission ended in failure, he was unable to convince the French to leave. The experience was pivotal. Washington learned quickly that the challenges of military leadership were far greater than those of surveying. In 1754, at the age of 22, Washington was given another opportunity to prove his military capabilities. The French and Indian War had begun, and Washington was appointed to lead an expedition to the Ohio Valley to confront the growing French presence. This campaign proved to be Washington's first real test as a military leader. Though his forces suffered a defeat at the Battle of Fort Necessity, Washington displayed courage and leadership in the face of adversity. His actions during this conflict earned him respect among his peers, and he emerged from the ordeal with a reputation as a determined and capable officer. Despite the early setbacks, Washington's experience during the French and Indian War would serve him well in the years to come. He would continue to rise through the ranks, eventually becoming commander of all Virginia's forces. His military career provided him with valuable lessons in leadership, strategy, and perseverance, qualities that would define his later role as the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army during the American Revolution. In many ways, George Washington's early career, both as a surveyor and as a military officer, laid the foundation for the man who would lead the American colonies to independence. His experiences in the wilderness and his growing involvement in military affairs helped shape his leadership style, emphasizing discipline, self-reliance, and a deep commitment to the cause of liberty. These early years would serve as the crucible in which Washington's character and abilities were forged. The French and Indian War, which raged between 1754 and 1763, was a conflict that had profound implications for the future of the American colonies and their relationship with Great Britain. For George Washington, it marked a crucial turning point in his life, shaping him into the leader he would later become during the American Revolution. The war, which was essentially the North American theatre of the 7 Years' War, involved the British and their American colonial allies fighting against the French and their Native American partners over control of vast territories in North America. In 1753, when Washington was just 21 years old, he was sent by the governor of Virginia, Robert Dinwiddie, on his first significant military mission to deliver a message to the French demanding that they leave the Ohio Valley, an area claimed by both the British and the French. Washington, a young lieutenant colonel at the time, embarked on a difficult and dangerous journey through the wilderness, travelling by canoe and on foot through the rough and uncharted lands. Though Washington and his small party of men were met with challenges, disease, harsh weather, and treacherous terrain, the mission gave him invaluable experience in the realities of frontier warfare. Upon reaching the French forces in the Ohio Valley, Washington was met with a firm refusal. The French, determined to hold their position in the region, ignored the British claims. This encounter marked the beginning of a long and bloody struggle for control of the continent. Washington returned to Virginia in the winter of 1753, but the tensions between the British and the French were escalating, and war seemed inevitable. The following year, in 1754, the conflict escalated, and Washington found himself at the heart of the action. The British authorities, seeing the French as a growing threat to their colonies, decided to take action. Washington was tasked with leading an expedition to the Ohio Valley, where he was to establish a fort at the strategic location of the French Fort Duquesne, which was located at the confluence of the Allegheny and Monongahela rivers, modern-day Pittsburgh. Washington, at just 22 years old, was given the responsibility of leading the British-backed forces into the region. Washington's campaign began with setbacks. His forces, though small in number, built a fort which they called Fort Necessity, in a defensible position. However, the French were quick to respond. In July 1754, a small force of French soldiers and their Native American allies ambushed Washington's troops at Fort Necessity. The battle was a humiliating defeat for Washington and his men. The young officer was forced to surrender the fort and retreat, though he was allowed to return to Virginia under the terms of the surrender. Despite the defeat, Washington's leadership during the retreat was recognized by his superiors. His actions during the Battle of Fort Necessity earned him respect among his peers, even though the campaign had not gone as planned. Washington's courage and ability to remain composed under pressure became evident, and these qualities would continue to define his character throughout his military career. The loss at Fort Necessity did not deter Washington. It only strengthened his resolve. He would go on to fight in several more engagements throughout the war, learning valuable lessons in military strategy, leadership, and the harsh realities of war. As the war continued, Washington's role grew. In 1755, during a larger British offensive in the Ohio Valley, he was appointed as a lieutenant colonel in the British Army and became involved in the command of larger units. However, the British efforts were met with further defeats, and Washington, although frustrated by the lack of progress, continued to serve with unwavering determination. In 1758, Washington's fortunes began to turn. The British and their American allies had shifted their focus toward a more coordinated military strategy. Washington, now a seasoned officer, played a pivotal role in the British victory at the Battle of Fort Duquesne. The victory came after a long and grueling campaign to dislodge the French from their stronghold. It was a significant moment in the war, and Washington's leadership helped ensure the British success. After the victory, the French were forced to abandon Fort Duquesne, and the British subsequently renamed the area Fort Pitt, in honour of William Pitt, the British Prime Minister. The French and Indian War ended in 1763 with the signing of the Treaty of Paris, which resulted in the French ceding much of their North American territory to the British. For Washington, the end of the war marked the conclusion of his military service in the Virginia militia. But the experiences he gained during the conflict would stay with him for the rest of his life. The war had been a crucible in which Washington honed his military leadership, forged important relationships, and developed a deep understanding of strategy and the complexities of warfare. During the war, Washington had experienced firsthand the challenges of leadership in a time of crisis. He learned to lead men through hardship, to remain calm under fire, and to make difficult decisions in the heat of battle. Though he was never a career soldier, the experiences he gained during the French and Indian War would serve as a foundation for his later military successes. As he returned to Virginia after the war, Washington was a different man than the one who had left in 1753. He had grown from a young, untested officer into a seasoned veteran of war. The lessons learned in the wilderness, on the battlefield, and during moments of defeat would shape his character for the rest of his life. His military career had given him the confidence and ability to lead, qualities that would become essential when the time came to confront the British again during the American Revolution. For Washington, the French and Indian War was not just a conflict between the British and the French, it was a crucible that shaped his destiny. It was in this war that he found his calling as a leader, a calling that would come to define the trajectory of his life. Though the war had been brutal and the outcomes uncertain, it was in these years that George Washington began to develop the skills and qualities that would lead him to the greatest challenge of his life, the fight for American independence. As George Washington returned to his civilian life in Virginia after the French and Indian War, the world around him was changing rapidly. The conflict had not only altered the political landscape of North America, but had also ignited tensions between the American colonies and Great Britain. Washington, who had gained invaluable military experience during the war, now faced the challenges of adjusting to a peacetime society. Yet it was precisely during this period of relative quiet that Washington's sense of duty and his growing concern over the future of the colonies would begin to shape his path toward the American Revolution. The British government, burdened by the immense cost of the war, sought to strengthen its control over the colonies and recoup its expenses. In 1763, following the Treaty of Paris, Britain imposed a series of new taxes and policies on its American colonies. The most famous of these was the Stamp Act of 1765, which required colonists to pay a tax on printed materials, from newspapers to legal documents. For many Americans, this was the first direct tax imposed by Britain on their day-to-day lives. The Stamp Act was viewed not only as a financial burden, but as a direct infringement on the colony's rights, sparking widespread protests. Washington, like many of his fellow Virginians, was deeply troubled by these developments. Though he had always considered himself loyal to Britain, the idea that the colonies could be taxed without representation was unacceptable. In 1765, Washington joined the Virginia House of Burgesses, where he quickly became an advocate for colonial rights. While not yet a leader of the independence movement, Washington's involvement in the Virginia legislature marked the beginning of his active participation in the growing revolutionary sentiment. The issue of taxation was only the beginning. As the British government continued to assert its authority over the colonies, tensions only increased. In 1770, the Boston Massacre, in which British soldiers killed 5 colonists, intensified anti-British feelings. And then, in 1773, the British Parliament passed the Tea Act, which gave the British East India Company a monopoly on tea sales in the colonies, once again provoking widespread protest. In response, the American colonies staged the Boston Tea Party, an act of defiance that further alienated the British government. It was in this climate of growing unrest that Washington's sense of duty to his country began to crystallize. The events of the 1760s and 1770s had stirred a deep sense of injustice within him. Washington had long believed in the rights of the colonies, but as the British government continued to tighten its grip, he became increasingly convinced that the colonies needed to take a stand, not just for their rights, but for their future. Washington's loyalty to Britain had begun to wane, and he saw the need for a new kind of leadership in the colonies, leadership that could guide them through the impending crisis. In 1774, Washington joined other colonial leaders in the First Continental Congress, a meeting of delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies, which convened in Philadelphia to address the growing tensions with Britain. While the Continental Congress was initially focused on finding a peaceful resolution, it became increasingly clear that reconciliation with Britain was unlikely. Washington, who had watched the colonies grow more agitated in the face of British policies, began to see the necessity of taking more direct action. The Continental Congress issued a Declaration of Rights and Grievances, but it was the subsequent call for military preparedness that marked a pivotal moment in Washington's life. The colonies, now united in their opposition to British tyranny, began to take steps toward arming themselves and organizing militias. Washington, who had already earned respect for his military experience during the French and Indian War, was appointed as a delegate to the Second Continental Congress in 1775. It was here, amidst the growing tension and the palpable sense of impending conflict, that Washington's destiny took its most significant turn. The Second Continental Congress, meeting in May 1775, was convened against the backdrop of open conflict. The battles of Lexington and Concord, which had taken place in April, had already marked the beginning of armed resistance to British rule. Washington, who had once served in the Virginia militia, now found himself appointed as the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. This was a remarkable turn of events. Washington, a man who had gained military experience during the French and Indian War, was now entrusted with leading a nascent army against the greatest military power of the time. The decision to place Washington at the head of the Continental Army was not one made lightly. His appointment was the result of both his military experience and his ability to unite people around a common cause. Washington, whose reputation had been built on his calm demeanor, discipline, and strategic mind, was seen as the leader who could hold the colonies together in their struggle for independence. And while Washington himself was wary of the enormity of the task ahead, he accepted the responsibility with the sense of duty that had guided him throughout his life. The outbreak of the Revolutionary War was not something that Washington had anticipated when he first became involved in colonial politics. The early signs of rebellion had stirred his sense of justice, but the reality of war was something entirely different. In the months following his appointment as Commander-in-Chief, Washington would face challenges unlike any he had encountered before. The Continental Army, though filled with passionate patriots, was inexperienced and poorly equipped. The British, on the other hand, had a well-trained and professional army. Washington's leadership would be tested in ways he could not have imagined. Despite the challenges, Washington's commitment to the cause of independence remained unwavering. The Revolutionary War, which began with the aim of asserting the colonies' right to self-government, would come to define Washington as one of the central figures in American history. His leadership would be critical in maintaining the colonies' resolve as they faced the overwhelming power of the British Empire. As Washington prepared for the conflict ahead, he knew that the struggle for independence would not be easily won. But it was clear to him that the cause was just, and he was determined to lead his fellow Americans in the fight for liberty. The rise of revolutionary sentiment in the colonies had shaped Washington's journey, and now, as the Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, he stood on the precipice of a new chapter in his life, a chapter that would define not only his own legacy but the future of an entire nation. The moment George Washington accepted the position of Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army in June 1775, he found himself at the center of an unparalleled historical challenge. The American colonies, now in open rebellion against Great Britain, had reached a point of no return. The skirmishes at Lexington and Concord had marked the first shots of what would become the Revolutionary War. Yet Washington knew that this war would not be decided by a single battle, but through a long and uncertain struggle for independence. With the fate of the American colonies at stake, he mustered all his resolve to lead an army that was as inexperienced as it was determined. Upon his appointment, Washington immediately traveled to the Continental Congress in Philadelphia to accept his commission. The Congress, realizing that this war would require the utmost strategic leadership, had chosen him for more than just his military experience. He was also seen as a symbol of unity. Washington's status as a Virginian, representing one of the southern colonies, was significant. It helped to bridge the divide between the northern and southern colonies, both of which needed to come together if they were to succeed in their shared cause. At the time of his appointment, the Continental Army was a patchwork of local militias with little formal training or discipline. The men who made up this army were largely farmers, craftsmen, and tradesmen, many of whom had never seen a battlefield before. The army's supplies were sparse, and its leadership was still in its infancy. Washington had no illusions about the size of the task ahead, but he accepted the challenge with a quiet determination that would define his leadership throughout the war. One of Washington's first priorities was to organize and train the army. He knew that the colonies could not afford to fight the war with an undisciplined force. Washington's early efforts were focused on instilling a sense of order and purpose within the army. His leadership style, which emphasized discipline, respect for authority, and strategic thinking, began to take shape. The Continental Army had to be molded into a force capable of taking on the British Army. No small feat, given the formidable military might of the British Empire. However, Washington's early efforts as commander-in-chief were not without their challenges. His first major military engagement came in the form of the Siege of Boston, where the Continental Army had surrounded British forces entrenched in the city. Despite the British Army's numerical superiority and superior artillery, Washington's army was able to maintain the siege. The British, who had been expecting a swift victory, found themselves trapped in a stalemate. For Washington, the Siege of Boston was an early test of his leadership, and while he did not achieve a decisive victory, the Continental Army's resolve and the prolonged pressure they put on the British were crucial. In March 1776, after months of blockade and tension, Washington achieved a significant victory. Using the cannons that had been captured at Fort Ticonderoga, he positioned them on Dorchester Heights, overlooking Boston. This strategic move forced the British to evacuate the city, marking the first major American victory in the war. The British, unable to defend the city against the newly fortified positions, left Boston in a hasty retreat. For Washington and his troops, the victory was not only a military success but a moment of psychological triumph. It was a demonstration that, despite their lack of training and resources, the Continental Army could stand toe-to-toe with the world's most powerful military. Despite the victory at Boston, Washington knew that the fight for independence was far from over. The British had not been defeated, and the war was far from won. In the following months, Washington's leadership would be tested even further. The Continental Army, while growing in experience, was still plagued by a lack of supplies, inconsistent enlistments, and soldiers' waning morale. The summer of 1776 would bring one of Washington's greatest challenges yet. In July of that year, the Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, formally severing ties with Great Britain. The declaration set the colonies on a path of no return, and the war became not just about independence but about the creation of a new nation. For Washington, this shift in the purpose of the war deepened his sense of responsibility. He was no longer merely a commander of an army. He was the leader of a revolution that would reshape the world. As Washington prepared for the British response, the Continental Army faced a series of defeats in the fall of 1776. The British, having regrouped after their retreat from Boston, launched a full-scale invasion of New York. Washington's forces were decisively beaten at the Battle of Brooklyn, and the British captured New York City. Faced with these losses, Washington was forced to retreat across New Jersey, with the British in hot pursuit. The winter of 1776 was one of uncertainty and hardship for Washington's army. Desertions were high, and morale was low. As the year drew to a close, it seemed that the cause for independence was on the brink of collapse. Yet it was in these darkest hours that Washington's leadership would shine. As his troops trudged through the snowy roads of New Jersey, with no hope of reinforcements or supplies, Washington resolved to strike a blow that would reignite the cause for independence. On Christmas night in 1776, he led his men across the Delaware River to attack the British Hessian forces stationed in Trenton, New Jersey. The surprise attack was a brilliant success, capturing nearly 1,000 Hessian soldiers and giving the Continental Army a much-needed victory. This victory at Trenton was more than just a tactical success. It was a turning point in the war. It revived the morale of Washington's troops and inspired new enlistments. Washington, having pulled off an audacious and unexpected victory, demonstrated his ability to lead in the most challenging of circumstances. The success at Trenton, followed by another victory at Princeton, showed that Washington's army could not only survive but could also fight and win against the British forces. The war was far from over, but for the first time Washington and the Continental Army had given the cause for independence a glimmer of hope. Washington's leadership during these early years of the war was defined by his resilience, adaptability, and unwavering commitment to the cause. Though the Continental Army faced many challenges, ranging from resource shortages to low morale, Washington remained focused on the ultimate goal, independence. His ability to inspire his troops, maintain unity among the colonies, and make difficult decisions in the face of adversity would be instrumental in the success of the American Revolution. As the war dragged on, Washington would face many more hardships, but the victory at Trenton marked a significant turning point in the Revolutionary War. Washington's leadership had proven itself under fire, and the cause for independence was now firmly rooted in the hearts and minds of the American people. From that moment forward, the path to victory was no longer just a distant hope. It was a real possibility. As the winter of 1776 dragged on, the cause of American independence seemed on the verge of collapse. The Continental Army, depleted and demoralized after months of retreat and defeat, was struggling to hold on to any semblance of hope. The British had captured New York City, and their forces, bolstered by thousands of Hessian mercenaries, were advancing through New Jersey. Washington's army, weary and outnumbered, seemed incapable of offering any real resistance. Yet, as the new year approached, George Washington made a bold and daring decision that would change the course of the war. Faced with the real possibility that the war effort might crumble if he could not turn the tide, Washington planned an audacious strike against the British Allied Hessian forces in Trenton, New Jersey. It would be a gamble, but Washington knew that without a victory the revolution might falter entirely. On the night of December the 25th, 1776, Washington embarked on one of the most famous and crucial missions of the American Revolution. With his army barely able to withstand the winter cold, Washington led his men across the frozen Delaware River under the cover of darkness. The river itself was treacherous, swollen by ice, and the crossing was a monumental logistical challenge. Yet Washington's determination and the resolve of his soldiers saw them through the perilous waters. As they reached the New Jersey shore, the men of the Continental Army were exhausted, hungry, and unwell. But Washington pressed on. Despite the bitter cold, they marched through the night to the town of Trenton, where the Hessian forces, who'd been occupying the town, were expected to be off guard after their Christmas celebrations. Washington knew that this was their moment. If they could strike decisively, the British war effort could suffer a significant blow. At dawn on December 26th, Washington's army launched a surprise attack on the Hessians, who were caught off guard by the audacity and speed of the assault. The battle that followed was a swift and decisive victory for the Continental Army. The Hessians, though seasoned soldiers, were unprepared for the attack and quickly surrendered. Nearly 1,000 Hessian troops were captured, and the Continental Army suffered very few casualties. The victory at the Battle of Trenton was a significant turning point in the American Revolution. For Washington, it was a victory not only on the battlefield, but also a victory of spirit. It demonstrated his ability to lead with boldness and to inspire his men, even when faced with seemingly insurmountable odds. The Continental Army, which had been on the brink of disintegration, was revitalized by this unexpected triumph. The news of the victory spread quickly, rekindling hope throughout the colonies and reinvigorating the cause for independence. But Washington knew that the battle for independence was far from won. The victory at Trenton, while important, was only one step in a long and arduous war. Still, it was a crucial step, and Washington understood that the Continental Army needed to build on this success if it were to continue the fight against the British. The victory at Trenton, however, did not mark the end of Washington's challenges. The British, though stunned by the defeat, were determined to maintain their hold on the colonies. In the days following the Battle of Trenton, Washington took advantage of the momentum to launch another bold move. Instead of retreating once again, he decided to strike again at the British forces, who were regrouping in nearby Princeton. On January 2, 1777, Washington led his troops to another surprise victory, this time at the Battle of Princeton. Washington's forces, despite being outnumbered, were able to outmaneuver the British and deliver another crushing blow. The British were forced to retreat, and Washington's army continued to hold its ground in New Jersey. The victories at Trenton and Princeton were transformative. Washington's ability to lead a series of successful strikes not only boosted the morale of his troops, but also altered the course of the war. The British were no longer able to claim an easy victory over the Continental Army, and Washington's reputation as a military leader began to grow. The victories demonstrated that the Continental Army could, indeed, hold its own against the British and their formidable forces. However, Washington's success was not without its challenges. The Continental Army was still under-equipped and lacked the necessary resources to sustain a prolonged war. Washington faced constant difficulties in securing supplies, including food, clothing, and ammunition for his troops. Many of his soldiers were ill-prepared for the harsh winter and desertions were common. Yet, despite these difficulties, Washington maintained his resolve. Knowing that the cause of independence depended on the success of his leadership and the unity of his men, Washington's decision to cross the Delaware River and launch the surprise attack at Trenton was a critical moment in the American Revolution. It not only revived the morale of his army but also solidified Washington's role as the leader of the Continental Army. His boldness and strategic foresight gave the American people something to rally behind: hope. The victories at Trenton and Princeton showed that despite the British Empire's overwhelming military superiority, the American cause was not without hope. Washington had proven that the colonies could stand up to the might of Britain, and his leadership had become a beacon of resolve for the cause of independence. In the weeks following the victories, Washington faced new challenges, but the momentum from Trenton and Princeton gave him the confidence to continue fighting. The Continental Army, though still in its infancy and facing numerous hardships, now had a sense of purpose and determination that would carry it through the darkest days of the war. Washington's ability to turn the tide of the Revolution with a series of daring, decisive victories marked him as one of the most important figures in American history. The winter of 1776 to 1777 was a turning point not only in the war but in Washington's own journey as a leader. His success at Trenton and Princeton cemented his reputation as a military commander capable of achieving victory against the odds. Washington's ability to inspire and lead his troops, even in the most difficult of circumstances, would prove vital as the war for independence continued. The winter of 1777 to 1778 was a brutal and defining period for George Washington and the Continental Army. After the victories at Trenton and Princeton, the Continental Army had gained much-needed momentum, but with winter approaching, Washington knew that the army would face its greatest challenge yet: surviving the harsh conditions of the season while maintaining its unity and readiness for the continuing struggle for independence. In December 1777, Washington and his army encamped at Valley Forge, a location chosen not only for its defensive advantages, but also for its proximity to British-occupied Philadelphia. The decision to establish camp in the harsh winter months was a difficult one. Washington understood that it was not only a matter of survival, but also a matter of maintaining morale. The army was still not properly equipped, and the winter months brought new hardships. Soldiers lacked adequate clothing, food was scarce, and many men were ill or injured. The camp was overcrowded, and the brutal cold compounded the suffering. Valley Forge, a quiet, remote location in the Pennsylvania countryside, became the symbol of the army's endurance. It was not a place of victory or celebration, but a place of struggle, where every day was a fight for survival. Washington faced tremendous pressure as he watched his men suffer. The soldiers, many of whom were farmers and laborers with little military experience, were weary and disheartened. The army had been built through Washington's leadership and the victories of the previous months, but Valley Forge tested their resolve like never before. Despite the hardships, Valley Forge was not simply a place of despair. It was also a turning point for the Continental Army. The key to Washington's success at Valley Forge was his ability to maintain discipline and to instill in his men a sense of purpose. He was determined that this winter would not break the spirit of the army, and he worked tirelessly to improve the conditions at camp. He ensured that troops were trained, and with the help of Baron von Steuben, a Prussian officer who had volunteered to serve in the Continental Army, Washington instituted a rigorous training regimen. Baron von Steuben's contributions were invaluable. Though he was initially an outsider to the American cause, von Steuben proved to be a brilliant drill master. He worked tirelessly to instill discipline, organize the troops, and teach them the essential skills needed to become a professional army. Under his instruction, the soldiers were taught proper military drills, formations, and maneuvers. Von Steuben's training helped to transform the Continental Army from a group of ragtag militias into a more unified and efficient fighting force. The transformation was gradual, but by the spring of 1778, the soldiers at Valley Forge were markedly more capable and confident. The hardships of the winter months brought a sense of camaraderie among the soldiers. The shared experience of struggle and suffering forged bonds that would be essential in the battles to come. Despite the adversity, the men at Valley Forge were not defeated by their circumstances. They remained committed to the cause of independence, and their resolve began to harden. During the winter at Valley Forge, Washington also had to contend with political pressures from the Continental Congress. While Washington focused on the survival and training of his army, he was faced with criticism from members of Congress who were dissatisfied with the progress of the war. Some questioned his leadership and decision-making, especially after the Continental Army's inability to deliver decisive victories in the fall of 1777. Washington was aware of the pressure from all sides, but he remained focused on the long-term goal of achieving American independence. He understood that the success of the army was paramount, and that the war could not be won in a single campaign or battle. It was the persistence, unity, and fortitude of his army that would ultimately lead to victory. Washington's leadership during the winter at Valley Forge was a testament to his character. While many of his soldiers were suffering from hunger, cold, and illness, Washington remained a constant source of strength and inspiration. He spent long hours visiting with the men, addressing their needs, and ensuring that they received what supplies were available. He also worked to maintain morale, writing letters to Congress and to his fellow officers, encouraging them to remain steadfast in their commitment to the cause. Though the winter at Valley Forge was a time of suffering, it was also a time of growth for Washington's army. The training that the soldiers received during this period would prove invaluable as the war continued. The Continental Army emerged from Valley Forge stronger, more disciplined, and better prepared for the battles to come. It was at Valley Forge that Washington's leadership was solidified. His ability to maintain unity and focus during the most difficult of times earned him the loyalty and respect of his soldiers. The experience at Valley Forge marked a critical moment in Washington's journey, and in the history of the American Revolution. The victory that came out of the suffering at Valley Forge was not a battle won with gunfire, but a battle won through perseverance, discipline, and leadership. When spring finally arrived in 1778, Washington was ready to lead his army into the next phase of the war. His soldiers, though scarred by the hardships they had endured, emerged from Valley Forge with renewed strength and determination. They were no longer the same army that had retreated in the face of British might. They were a force to be reckoned with, united by the trials they had overcome and the leadership they had followed. Valley Forge was a critical moment in the American Revolution, not only because of the lessons it taught Washington and his army, but also because it demonstrated to the world the resolve of the American cause. The Continental Army, though small and under-equipped, was resilient. Under Washington's leadership, it had endured the harshest of conditions and emerged stronger. It was no longer a question of whether the Continental Army could survive. The question was whether the British could withstand the growing strength of the American forces. Washington had proven that no matter the odds, the American cause would not be easily extinguished. The winter at Valley Forge had transformed the Continental Army into a more disciplined and cohesive fighting force, and by the spring of 1778, Washington's leadership was beginning to bear fruit. But even as the army prepared for the coming campaigns, Washington knew that the road to independence would be long and fraught with challenges. The British, though stretched thin across their empire, remained formidable, and the Continental Army still lacked many of the resources necessary to defeat such an adversary. However, by 1778, a crucial shift had occurred in the course of the war. France, motivated by its rivalry with Britain and inspired by the American struggle for independence, had formally entered the conflict on the side of the colonies. The French alliance was a game-changer. It provided the Continental Army with essential supplies, military support, and most importantly, naval assistance. France's entry into the war shifted the balance of power and gave Washington and his forces the strategic edge they had so desperately needed. The French were not only able to provide resources and manpower, but also a crucial naval presence that would become pivotal in Washington's strategy. With the French fleet's support, the American forces could now contest British control of the seas. This new alliance also brought seasoned French officers, such as the Marquis de Lafayette, who would play an important role in the development of the Continental Army. Lafayette's enthusiasm and military expertise were instrumental in building the confidence of the American soldiers, many of whom looked to him as a symbol of the international support for their cause. By 1781, the war had reached a critical point. The British, under General Cornwallis, had established a strong position in the southern colonies, attempting to quash the resistance by targeting the southern militias. The British strategy was to wear down the American forces and win over the southern population, which they hoped would sway the war in their favour. Washington, however, saw an opportunity to strike a decisive blow at the heart of the British forces. With the help of French reinforcements, he would launch a campaign that would bring the conflict to a close. In the spring of 1781, Washington and his French allies devised a plan to encircle Cornwallis's army, which had taken up a defensive position in Yorktown, Virginia. Cornwallis had hoped to resupply by sea, but the French fleet under Admiral de Grasse blocked the British ships from reaching the coast, effectively trapping Cornwallis's forces on land. The American and French armies, now operating in unison, advanced toward Yorktown, while Washington's forces cut off any possible escape routes for the British. For Washington, the siege of Yorktown was a culmination of years of struggle and sacrifice. He knew that victory here could mean the end of the war and the recognition of American independence. His forces, bolstered by the French, laid siege to the town, building trenches and bombarding the British positions with artillery. Cornwallis, though a skilled commander, found himself unable to hold out against the combined forces. The siege dragged on, but the British were overwhelmed. On October 19, 1781, Cornwallis, realizing that further resistance was futile, formally surrendered his army to Washington and the French commanders. Nearly 8,000 British troops laid down their arms, marking the beginning of the end of the Revolutionary War. The surrender at Yorktown was a pivotal moment in the struggle for independence. While fighting continued in other parts of the world, the British defeat in Yorktown effectively sealed the fate of the American Revolution. Washington's leadership and the successful French alliance had brought the war to a close, securing the independence of the United States. The victory at Yorktown was not just a military triumph. It was a testament to Washington's unwavering resolve and his ability to lead his troops through adversity. The victory symbolized the resilience of the American cause, proving that despite overwhelming odds, the colonies could defeat the most powerful empire on earth. Washington's strategic thinking, perseverance, and willingness to work with international allies had turned the tide of the war. But the surrender at Yorktown did not mark the end of Washington's journey. There was still much work to be done to secure the peace and to ensure that the newly formed United States could function as a stable nation. The Treaty of Paris, which would formally end the war, would not be signed until 1783. Washington, understanding that the struggle was far from over, worked tirelessly to maintain the unity of his forces and ensure that the army would not dissolve before peace was achieved. His leadership during this time was crucial in preventing the army from disbanding prematurely, ensuring that the Continental Army remained a strong force until the final terms of peace were settled. As Washington stood on the battlefield at Yorktown, he could reflect on the long and difficult path that had led him to this moment. The years of struggle, sacrifice, and hardship had brought the colonies to the brink of victory. His leadership had been integral in maintaining the spirit of the Revolution, and his military successes, both at Trenton and at Yorktown, had proven his ability to lead an army under the most challenging circumstances. Washington had not only fought for the independence of his country, but had also forged a path for a new kind of leadership, one that was focused on service to the nation rather than personal glory. The victory at Yorktown, though significant, was not the end of Washington's public service. In fact, it marked the beginning of his involvement in the creation of the new American Republic. Washington knew that the future of the nation would require new forms of governance, and he would be called upon once again to lead. This time, not in war, but in the formation of a government that could unite the fledgling states into a strong and independent union. Following the victory at Yorktown, the American Revolution was, in essence, won. However, the struggle for a new and lasting nation was just beginning. The Treaty of Paris, signed in 1783, officially ended the conflict and recognized the United States as an independent nation. For George Washington, the culmination of his long years of service in the military brought both a deep sense of accomplishment and a new set of challenges. While his leadership in the battlefield had secured victory, Washington now faced the daunting task of helping to shape a government that could sustain the independence for which so many had fought and sacrificed. In December 1783, with the war officially over, Washington made his decision to retire from public life. After years of leading the Continental Army, he was ready to return to his home at Mount Vernon and resume life as a private citizen, in a symbolic act that further solidified his reputation as a leader committed to the ideals of republicanism. Washington voluntarily relinquished his military command and handed control of the army back to Congress. His decision was unprecedented. He could have easily sought greater power for himself, but Washington chose to step away from military leadership, setting a powerful example of humility and dedication to the cause of liberty. Upon his retirement, Washington returned to the peace and solitude of his Virginia estate. However, the nation's need for leadership was far from over. The Articles of Confederation, the first Constitution of the United States, had proven to be an inadequate framework for governing the new nation. The country was struggling with economic instability, interstate disputes, and a lack of a strong central government. The Confederation Congress had little authority over the states, and the national government's inability to raise revenue or maintain a standing army was a serious concern. In 1787, Washington was called out of retirement to attend the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, a pivotal moment in the young nation's history. Despite his desire for peace and solitude, Washington understood that the future of the United States depended on the creation of a more effective and lasting system of government. His leadership at the Constitutional Convention was critical. Though he did not participate extensively in the debates, Washington's presence provided a unifying force. His reputation as a military leader, coupled with his unwavering commitment to the principles of liberty, gave him unparalleled authority among the delegates. The convention, which began in May 1787, was convened to revise the Articles of Confederation, but as the discussions progressed, it became clear that a complete overhaul of the nation's governing structure was necessary. Washington, who had long been committed to the idea of a strong federal government, supported the creation of a new constitution that would grant more powers to the central government while still protecting individual liberties. As the convention came to a close in September 1787, the U.S. Constitution was drafted, providing the framework for the new government. The work of the Constitutional Convention was only the beginning, however. The new Constitution required ratification by the states, and the process of gaining approval was not without its challenges. Washington, though deeply involved in the debates, remained mostly silent on the specifics of the proposed document. However, his endorsement of the Constitution carried immense weight. Washington's support helped to sway public opinion and convince hesitant states to ratify the document. As the nation turned its attention toward the question of who would lead this new government, Washington's name was the only one that seemed to command universal respect. The new Constitution provided for the office of president, and there was little doubt among the American people that Washington should be the first to occupy the office. In 1789, Washington was unanimously elected as the first president of the United States. His election was a testament to the trust the nation placed in him, and to the respect he had earned through his military service and leadership during the Revolution. Despite his initial desire for retirement, Washington accepted the presidency with a sense of duty. He understood the enormity of the task ahead, leading a young nation that was still finding its footing. The country was divided over many issues, including how to balance the powers of the states and the federal government, and what role the United States should play on the world stage. Washington's leadership would be crucial in navigating these challenges and ensuring that the fledgling nation did not falter under the weight of its own idealism. Washington's presidency began with a sense of solemn responsibility. He sought to build a strong and stable government that would honor the principles of liberty, while also providing for the nation's security and prosperity. He understood that his actions in the early years of the presidency would set a precedent for future generations. The challenges of his presidency were considerable, but Washington's steady hand and commitment to the ideals of the Revolution provided the nation with the stability it needed in those early years. One of Washington's first tasks as president was to establish the new federal government. The U.S. Constitution had created a system with three branches of government: the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. Washington understood that the executive branch headed by the president needed to be strong but also limited in its power. He worked with Congress to establish the first cabinet, a group of trusted advisors who would help him navigate the complex issues of governance. The cabinet included figures such as Thomas Jefferson, who became the first Secretary of State, and Alexander Hamilton, who served as Secretary of the Treasury. Washington's presidency also saw the establishment of many key institutions of the new government. Under his leadership, the Bill of Rights was added to the Constitution, guaranteeing fundamental freedoms such as freedom of speech, religion, and the press. The judiciary was also given structure with the creation of the federal court system. Washington worked to ensure that these institutions were not only functional, but also respected by the people they served. Perhaps one of Washington's most important decisions as president was his choice to step down after 2 terms in office. Washington could have easily remained in power, but he understood that the principles of the Republic would only be preserved if the office of the president remained limited in power. His decision to retire after 2 terms set a precedent for future presidents and ensured that no one leader would hold too much power for too long. Washington's leadership during his 2 terms in office helped to lay the foundations for the United States as a stable, functioning republic. His refusal to seek power beyond his presidency, his commitment to the rule of law, and his dedication to the principles of liberty were crucial in shaping the character of the new nation. Washington's time as president was not without its challenges, but his steady leadership ensured that the United States would survive its early trials and continue on its path toward growth and prosperity. In the years following the Revolutionary War, the United States faced a set of unique challenges. The newly formed nation, still in its infancy, struggled to establish a government that would work effectively for all the states. The Articles of Confederation, which had been adopted during the war, proved to be inadequate for governing a nation of such size and complexity. They lacked a strong central government, and many of the states were unwilling to cede power to a national authority. The result was an unstable and ineffective system of governance, one that could not address the economic and political challenges facing the young republic. By 1786, it had become clear to many that the Articles needed to be revised. In that year, a convention was convened in Annapolis, Maryland, to discuss possible reforms. However, the turnout was disappointingly low, and the delegates quickly realized that a more comprehensive solution was necessary. This led to the calling of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia the following year. The Constitutional Convention, which convened in May 1787, was a momentous event in the history of the United States. The goal was not simply to amend the Articles of Confederation, but to create an entirely new system of government. Delegates from 12 of the 13 states gathered to discuss and draft a new constitution that would establish the framework for a more powerful central government, while still protecting the rights of individual states. The convention was a diverse gathering, with delegates representing a wide range of political views, regional interests, and personal ideologies. Among them was George Washington, who was elected as the president of the convention. Though Washington did not speak as often as some of the other delegates, his presence was essential to the success of the proceedings. He was widely respected by all parties, and his leadership helped to keep the convention focused on its goal of creating a viable national government. The convention was marked by intense debates over the structure of the new government. One of the key issues was the balance of power between the federal government and the states. Some delegates, like James Madison, argued for a strong central government, while others, such as Patrick Henry, believed that the states should retain significant power. The most contentious debate centered around the question of representation. The smaller states feared that they would be overwhelmed by the larger states, so they advocated for equal representation for each state in the new legislature. The larger states, on the other hand, wanted representation based on population. After weeks of debate, the delegates reached a compromise known as the Great Compromise, which established a bicameral legislature. The Senate would have equal representation for each state, while the House of Representatives would be based on population. This compromise helped to break the deadlock and ensured that both large and small states would have a voice in the new government. Another important issue was the question of slavery. While slavery was entrenched in many southern states, It was a deeply divisive issue, particularly in the North. The delegates reached a compromise on this issue as well, agreeing to count each enslaved person as 3/5 of a person for purposes of representation and taxation. This provision, known as the 3/5 Compromise, allowed the Southern states to gain more representation in the House of Representatives while still limiting the political power of slavery. The delegates also debated the structure of the executive branch. While some favored a strong presidency with sweeping powers, others feared that such a concentration of power could lead to tyranny. After much debate, the framers of the Constitution agreed on a single president, elected by the Electoral College with limited powers. The president would serve as the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, negotiate treaties, and enforce the laws passed by Congress, but his powers would be checked by the legislature and the judiciary. Despite the differences of opinion, the Constitutional Convention ultimately produced a draft of the new Constitution. On September 17th, 1787, the final version of the document was signed by 39 of the 55 delegates. The Constitution created a government based on the principles of federalism and separation of powers. It established a system of checks and balances, ensuring that no one branch of government would become too powerful. Once the Constitution was completed, the next step was to secure its ratification by the states. This process was not without its challenges, as many states were skeptical of the new government. Some feared that the Constitution would give too much power to the central government and undermine the rights of the states and individual citizens. Others were concerned that the Constitution did not include a Bill of Rights, which would guarantee basic freedoms like freedom of speech and religion. Despite these concerns, the Constitution was eventually ratified by the necessary 9 states. Washington's influence played a crucial role in this process. His leadership and reputation helped reassure those who were wary of the new government, and his support was instrumental in securing the Constitution's passage. In 1789, the newly ratified Constitution went into effect, and Washington was elected as the first President of the United States. His leadership during the Constitutional Convention, as well as his commitment to the principles of republicanism, had played a key role in shaping the foundation of the American government. Washington's presidency would mark the beginning of a new era for the United States, one in which the principles of democracy and self-government would be tested and strengthened. After the successful ratification of the U.S. Constitution, the newly established United States found itself on the cusp of a new era. The question of leadership was paramount. While the system of government had been designed to prevent any one individual from gaining too much power, there was little doubt that the first President of the United States would serve as a symbol of national unity and stability. In the end, there was no serious competition for the position of President. George Washington, the hero of the Revolution, the Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, and the man who had led the country to victory, was the unanimous choice to serve as the nation's first president. Washington's election to the presidency in 1789 was not only a testament to his leadership, but also to the respect and admiration he had earned over the years. His decision to step down after the Revolutionary War had reinforced his reputation as a leader committed to the principles of republicanism and the idea of public service. Now, as the first president of the United States, Washington was tasked with leading a country that was still fragile and uncertain, one that was grappling with questions of governance and the balance of power. The process of electing Washington was a reflection of the new American system. Under the Constitution, the president was not elected by popular vote but by the Electoral College, a system in which each state chose electors who would cast their votes for the president. The framers of the Constitution had designed the Electoral College as a safeguard to prevent any one region or faction from dominating the election. The system was, in part, a response to the fear of mob rule and the desire to protect the interests of smaller states. Despite the indirect nature of the election process, Washington's election was essentially a formality. He was the overwhelming choice for president, and he was elected unanimously by the Electoral College. His election, however, was not without its complexities. Washington was well aware that the responsibilities of the presidency would be immense. The fledgling nation was still grappling with the aftermath of the Revolution, and the Constitution, while a significant achievement, was an untested document that needed to be implemented carefully and thoughtfully. Washington was also conscious of the symbolism of his presidency. As the first person to hold the office, he would set precedents that would shape the future of the presidency and the nation. He knew that his actions, decisions, and leadership style would define the role of the president for generations to come. Washington's sense of duty and honor led him to approach the presidency with great caution, as he sought to balance the powers of the executive with the needs of a fledgling republic. In April 1789, Washington was sworn in as the first president of the United States. The ceremony was held in New York City, which at the time served as the temporary capital of the United States. As Washington took the oath of office, he symbolized the hopes and aspirations of the nation. The crowd that gathered to witness the event was filled with anticipation, knowing that the future of their country was in Washington's hands. The first days of Washington's presidency were marked by a sense of solemnity and determination. Washington understood the importance of establishing the proper foundations for the new government. One of his first priorities was to establish the executive branch of the government, which was still largely undefined by the Constitution. Washington worked closely with Congress to create the Departments of State, Treasury, and War, which would serve as the backbone of the federal government. He also appointed his cabinet, selecting individuals who he believed could help him navigate the complex issues facing the nation. Among the men Washington chose for his cabinet were some of the most influential figures in American history. Thomas Jefferson, who had served as the principal author of the Declaration of Independence, was appointed Secretary of State. Alexander Hamilton, a brilliant financial mind who had played a key role in drafting the Constitution, was appointed Secretary of the Treasury. Henry Knox, a trusted officer in the Revolutionary War, was named Secretary of War. Washington's cabinet was a reflection of his desire to bring together diverse voices and talents to help govern the new nation. Despite the challenges of forming a new government, Washington was able to achieve a series of important victories in the early years of his presidency. One of his most significant accomplishments was the establishment of the financial system. Under Hamilton's guidance, the Treasury Department created a plan to manage the nation's war debt, establish a national bank, and stabilize the currency. This plan was instrumental in building the foundation for a strong national economy. Washington also faced challenges in foreign policy. The United States, having recently won its independence, was still trying to establish itself on the world stage. The French Revolution, which broke out in 1789, posed a significant challenge to Washington's administration. The United States had strong ties to France, and many Americans sympathized with the French revolutionaries. However, Washington was also aware of the risks of becoming entangled in European conflicts. He ultimately decided to pursue a policy of neutrality, seeking to avoid involvement in the ongoing conflicts between France and Great Britain. This decision would shape American foreign policy for years to come. As Washington navigated these early challenges, he was keenly aware of the need to maintain the stability of the new government. The United States was still in the process of defining its identity, and Washington's leadership was critical in ensuring that the principles of the Constitution were upheld. His presidency was marked by a careful balance of power, as he sought to establish the authority of the executive branch while respecting the rights of the states and the limits of the federal government. While Washington's presidency was characterized by its caution and thoughtfulness, it was also marked by moments of great political tension. The emergence of political factions, particularly between Hamilton's supporters, who favored a strong central government, and Jefferson's followers, who advocated for states' rights and a more limited federal government, created significant divisions within Washington's cabinet. Despite these tensions, Washington remained focused on the goal of maintaining national unity. He was careful to avoid aligning himself too closely with either faction, believing that a divided government would only weaken the nation. As Washington's first term continued, the challenges of governing the new republic only increased. The economic difficulties left over from the Revolutionary War, combined with the emerging political divisions, tested the strength of the young nation. But Washington's steady hand and unwavering commitment to the principles of liberty and unity provided a sense of stability during this uncertain time. His leadership during this formative period was crucial in shaping the future of the United States. In the early years of his presidency, George Washington was acutely aware of the enormity of the task before him. The United States, still a young and fragile nation, was grappling with both internal and external challenges. The Constitution had created a framework for governance, but Washington understood that the real work lay in translating the ideals of the new government into practical policies that would benefit the nation and secure its future. One of Washington's most important priorities was establishing the financial stability of the United States. At the time of his inauguration in 1789, the country was burdened by significant war debt, and its economy was fragile. The nation's credit was weak, and many states were struggling with their own debts. Washington knew that without a sound financial system, the United States would not survive as a cohesive nation. To address these issues, Washington turned to Alexander Hamilton, his Secretary of the Treasury, whose vision for the financial future of the United States was both bold and innovative. Hamilton's plan aimed to consolidate the national debt, establish a national bank, and create a system of taxes and tariffs to generate revenue for the federal government. At the heart of Hamilton's plan was the establishment of a national bank, which would serve as a central institution for managing the country's finances, regulating currency, and providing loans to businesses and the government. While Hamilton's financial plan was designed to stabilize the nation's economy, it was also deeply controversial. Many Americans, particularly those from the agricultural South, were suspicious of a powerful central government and the idea of a national bank. Thomas Jefferson, who served as Secretary of State under Washington, was one of the most vocal critics of Hamilton's plan. Jefferson argued that the Constitution did not grant the federal government the power to create a national bank, and that such a bank would only serve the interests of the wealthy and powerful elites. Despite the opposition, Washington ultimately sided with Hamilton, believing that the financial stability of the United States was more important than the fears of over-centralization. Hamilton's plan was passed by Congress, and the Bank of the United States was established in 1791. The creation of the bank, along with the other elements of Hamilton's financial system, helped to stabilize the nation's finances and lay the groundwork for future economic growth. In addition to his economic policies, Washington also faced significant challenges in the realm of foreign relations. The United States, now independent, had to navigate its relationship with foreign powers, particularly Britain and France. Washington was acutely aware of the dangers of entangling the young nation in European conflicts, and he sought to maintain a policy of neutrality in foreign affairs. His decision to remain neutral during the conflicts between Britain and France would shape American foreign policy for decades to come. The French Revolution, which had begun in 1789, was a source of great concern for Washington. While many Americans sympathized with the French revolutionaries and their fight for liberty, Washington feared that the United States could not afford to become involved in another war, especially one that might drag the nation into a conflict with Britain. Washington's policy of neutrality was challenged by the French, who expected American support for their cause. In 1793, the French sent Edmond Charles Genet, a diplomat, to the United States, hoping to rally support for the French Revolution. Jeannette's actions, which included attempting to organize American privateers to attack British ships, caused a diplomatic crisis. Washington responded by issuing the Proclamation of Neutrality in April 1793, declaring that the United States would remain neutral in the conflict between France and Britain. The decision was not universally popular, and it caused divisions within Washington's cabinet. Jefferson, who sympathized with the French, resigned from his post as Secretary of State in protest. However, Washington remained steadfast in his belief that neutrality was the best course of action for the United States, as the nation was not yet strong enough to risk being drawn into a European war. In addition to his foreign policy challenges, Washington faced domestic unrest. The Whiskey Rebellion of 1794, a protest by farmers in western Pennsylvania against a federal excise tax on whiskey, was one of the first major tests of Washington's authority as president. The tax, which was part of Hamilton's financial plan, was unpopular among farmers, who relied on whiskey production as a source of income. The rebellion grew to the point where armed resistance was threatened, and Washington understood that the federal government could not afford to allow such challenges to its authority to go unaddressed. In response to the rebellion, Washington took decisive action. He called up a militia of 13,000 troops and led them to western Pennsylvania to quell the uprising. The show of force was effective in ending the rebellion without bloodshed. The Whiskey Rebellion demonstrated Washington's commitment to preserving the authority of the federal government and its ability to enforce its laws. It also set an important precedent for the use of military force to maintain order and the rule of law in the new nation. At home, Washington also worked to strengthen the nation's infrastructure. He signed into law legislation that created a system of national roads, which helped to connect the states and facilitate trade and communication. The establishment of a postal system, which began under Washington's leadership, further improved communication across the country. These policies, along with the creation of a national currency and the expansion of the national banking system, helped to lay the foundation for a unified and growing economy. Washington's domestic policies were not without their critics. The country was deeply divided over issues such as the role of the federal government, the balance of power between the states and the central government, and the direction of American foreign policy. Washington's leadership during this time was critical in maintaining unity and stability. His ability to navigate these difficult issues, while also setting important precedents for the future, was one of the defining characteristics of his presidency. By the end of Washington's first term in office, the United States had made significant progress in establishing itself as a stable, functioning republic. Washington's leadership had helped to guide the country through its early challenges and lay the foundation for future success. His decisions on domestic policies, particularly in the areas of finance, infrastructure, and governance, helped to solidify the federal government's authority and position the United States for growth in the years ahead. As George Washington's first term continued, his leadership was tested not only by domestic challenges, but also by the shifting tides of international relations. The newly formed United States had a fragile position on the world stage. While it had secured its independence from Britain, the country was still small, inexperienced, and dependent on European powers for trade and diplomacy. Washington understood that navigating foreign relations carefully was essential to securing the nation's future. Above all, he believed that the United States should avoid becoming entangled in the wars and conflicts of Europe, at least until it was more established and capable of defending its interests. The French Revolution, which began in 1789, presented one of the most immediate and difficult challenges to Washington's foreign policy. The revolution had initially inspired many Americans who saw it as an extension of the ideals of liberty and equality that had driven the American Revolution. Many Americans were sympathetic to the French cause and some, like Thomas Jefferson, wanted the United States to side with France in its struggle against the monarchy. However, Washington was wary of becoming involved in a conflict between France and Britain. The French Revolution had taken a violent turn, with the Reign of Terror and the rise of radical factions. Washington knew that France's instability and the potential for a wider European conflict could drag the United States into a war it was not prepared for. Washington's priority was to safeguard the new nation and its fragile independence. He believed that the United States should pursue a policy of neutrality, refraining from taking sides in the European conflict. In 1793, Washington issued the Proclamation of Neutrality, declaring that the United States would remain neutral in the war between France and Britain. The proclamation was a bold move, one that would define American foreign policy for many years to come. Washington understood that the young United States could not afford to fight another war with Britain, especially when its military forces were still limited and its economy was fragile. At the same time, Washington was determined to honor the French alliance that had helped the colonies win the Revolutionary War. The Proclamation of Neutrality sought to balance these competing interests. The decision to remain neutral was not without controversy. Many Americans, particularly those who'd supported France during the Revolution, felt that Washington's policy was a betrayal. Jefferson, who'd been a strong advocate for the French, resigned from his position as Secretary of State in protest, feeling that Washington's neutrality aligned the United States too closely with Britain. Jefferson's departure marked a significant moment in Washington's presidency, as it revealed the growing political divisions within the administration and the country at large. Despite the opposition, Washington remained firm in his belief that neutrality was the best course for the United States. He recognized that the nation was not yet strong enough to intervene in European conflicts, and that doing so would risk jeopardizing the gains of the American Revolution. Washington's neutrality policy was not just about avoiding war. It was also about ensuring the long-term survival of the United States as an independent nation. His decisions were guided by a pragmatic approach to foreign relations, grounded in the belief that the United States should focus on strengthening its own institutions and economy before becoming entangled in foreign wars. The policy of neutrality was tested when the French government sent Edmond Charles Genet, a French ambassador, to the United States in 1793. Genet sought to rally American support for France's war effort, hoping to encourage Americans to form privateers, attack British ships, and provide aid to France. Genet's actions created a diplomatic crisis, as he ignored Washington's neutrality policy and actively sought to undermine it. In response to Genet's actions, Washington took firm action. He demanded that the French government recall Genet, asserting the United States' neutrality and making it clear that the country would not engage in military action on behalf of any foreign power. Washington's handling of the Genet crisis was a testament to his ability to navigate complex foreign relations with both resolve and diplomacy. He understood the importance of maintaining the United States' independence and reputation on the world stage, even when faced with external pressure. The challenges in Europe were not the only issues that Washington had to address in his foreign policy. The United States also faced problems with its northern neighbour, Britain, which continued to maintain a military presence in the Western Territories, even after the Treaty of Paris in 1783. The British were not living up to their commitments under the treaty, and their actions were a source of ongoing tension between the two nations. Washington knew that the United States had to resolve these issues to avoid further conflict with Britain. In 1794, Washington sent John Jay, the Chief Justice of the United States, to Britain to negotiate a treaty. The result was Jay's Treaty, which sought to address several outstanding issues between the two countries, including British interference with American trade and the continued presence of British troops in the Western Territories. The treaty was controversial, as many Americans felt it did not go far enough in addressing British violations of American sovereignty. However, Washington believed that it was necessary to avoid war with Britain and to secure the peace that the young nation needed to prosper. Jay's Treaty was ratified by the Senate, but it remained a source of division in American politics. Jefferson and his followers, who believed that the treaty was too conciliatory toward Britain, vehemently opposed it. Meanwhile, Hamilton and the Federalists supported the treaty as a necessary step in preserving peace and protecting American interests. Washington's handling of the treaty, though controversial, ultimately preserved peace with Britain and allowed the United States to focus on its internal development. Washington's foreign policy achievements were not limited to his dealings with France and Britain. He also worked to strengthen relations with Spain, which had territorial interests in North America. Washington's administration negotiated the Pinckney Treaty with Spain in 1795, which resolved several territorial disputes and secured American access to the Mississippi River and the port of New Orleans. This treaty was a significant diplomatic success, as it opened new avenues for trade and provided greater security for the Western territories. Washington's foreign policy achievements, particularly his commitment to neutrality and his skillful diplomacy with European powers, helped to ensure the survival and stability of the United States during its early years. His leadership in foreign relations set a precedent for future presidents and established the principle of neutrality as a cornerstone of American diplomacy. Washington understood that the nation's best interest lay in avoiding entanglements with the great powers of Europe, allowing the United States to focus on its own growth and development. As Washington's first term came to an end, the United States stood at a crossroads. Washington had successfully navigated the challenges of foreign relations and established the country's place in the world. His policy of neutrality had preserved the nation's peace and security, and his leadership had helped to lay the foundation for the United States to become a global power in the years to come. By the mid-1790s, George Washington had firmly established his leadership as the first President of the United States, having guided the nation through the establishment of its government and key domestic and foreign policies. But the new nation still faced many challenges, some of which would directly test Washington's ability to enforce the laws of the federal government. One such challenge came in the form of the Whiskey Rebellion in 1794, a confrontation between farmers in western Pennsylvania and the newly formed U.S. government over an excise tax on distilled spirits. The rebellion would test Washington's resolve in maintaining federal authority and set an important precedent for future federal responses to domestic unrest. The seeds of the Whiskey Rebellion were sown in 1791 when Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of the Treasury, proposed an excise tax on whiskey. Hamilton's rationale for the tax was clear. He needed to raise revenue to pay off the national debt, much of which had been incurred during the Revolutionary War. The tax was part of Hamilton's broader plan to establish a stable financial system for the country, which included creating a national bank and establishing a system of tariffs and taxes to strengthen the federal government's power and improve the nation's credit. However, the tax on whiskey was deeply unpopular, particularly among small farmers in the western frontier regions. In places like western Pennsylvania, whiskey was an essential part of daily life, both as a commodity and as a medium of exchange. Many farmers, who were often isolated from major markets, used whiskey as a form of currency and saw the tax as an unfair burden. To them, it was not just a tax on liquor but a direct threat to their livelihood. Opposition to the whiskey tax grew quickly. In the western counties of Pennsylvania, a series of protests erupted, with farmers refusing to pay the tax and even attacking tax collectors. The unrest escalated in 1794, when a group of insurgents burned the house of a tax collector and openly defied the federal government's authority. The rebellion had taken on a more violent and defiant character, with participants organizing into groups and openly challenging the rule of law. The threat to the authority of the federal government had become very real, and Washington recognized that the rebellion could spiral into something far more dangerous if left unchecked. As president, Washington faced a critical decision: how to respond to the Whiskey Rebellion. On one hand, he wanted to avoid further alienating the western frontier, where resentment of the federal government was already high. On the other hand, Washington knew that allowing the rebellion to go unchallenged would undermine the authority of the new government and potentially set a dangerous precedent for future acts of rebellion. In October 1794, Washington made a decisive choice. He called up a militia force of around 13,000 men drawn from several states to quell the rebellion. Washington himself, though advanced in age and not a young man anymore, took the unprecedented step of leading the militia, marking the first time a sitting president had personally led a military force. The move was not just about putting down a violent protest. It was a demonstration of the federal government's commitment to enforcing the laws of the land and maintaining the peace. As the federal militia advanced toward western Pennsylvania, the rebellious forces quickly dissolved. The sight of a large, well-organized military force was enough to intimidate the insurgents into submission, and the rebellion collapsed without any major military confrontation. By the time Washington's forces arrived in the region, the threat had largely dissipated, and the insurgents had scattered. No significant bloodshed occurred, and the rebellion was effectively ended. Several of the leaders of the Whiskey Rebellion were arrested, although only 2 were convicted of treason. Washington's firm but measured response ensured that the rebellion would not spread, and it reinforced the authority of the new federal government. While the Whiskey Rebellion was not a large-scale war or a long-lasting conflict, it had significant implications for the young nation. Washington's response to the rebellion set a critical precedent for how the federal government would handle domestic unrest. By acting decisively, Washington demonstrated that the United States would not tolerate open defiance of its laws. His leadership during the crisis helped solidify the principle that the government had the right and responsibility to use military force to maintain order and protect its authority. The Whiskey Rebellion also revealed the deep divisions within the United States. The resistance to the whiskey tax was not just about a tax on alcohol. It was about a growing sense of discontent with the perceived elitism of the federal government, particularly the policies of Hamilton and the Federalists. Many in the western frontier, where farms were small and often isolated, felt that the government in Philadelphia was disconnected from their needs and interests. The tax was seen as yet another example of the government imposing laws and regulations that benefited the eastern seaboard at the expense of the frontier. For Washington, the rebellion was a reminder of the fragile nature of the Union he had worked so hard to create. While he believed in the need for a strong central government, he also recognized the need for fairness and understanding in dealing with the people who felt left out of the political process. Washington took care to ensure that the federal government responded to the rebellion in a way that would strengthen the Union without further alienating the western regions. After the rebellion was suppressed, Washington worked to reassure the citizens of the western frontier that their concerns would be addressed and that the government would not seek to impose undue burdens on them. Despite the success of the government's response to the Whiskey Rebellion, the episode had lasting political consequences. It deepened the divisions between the Federalists who supported a strong central government and the Democratic Republicans, led by Thomas Jefferson, who advocated for a more decentralized system of government. The events of 1794 highlighted the tension between the vision of a strong federal government and the desire for states' rights and limited federal power. Washington, though troubled by the growing political divisions, remained steadfast in his belief that the United States needed a strong central government to thrive. The Whiskey Rebellion, while an important test of his leadership, also served as a reminder of the challenges he faced in balancing the competing interests of different regions and political factions. As Washington moved into his second term, the divisions that had emerged during the Whiskey Rebellion would continue to shape the political landscape of the United States. The rise of political parties and the growing opposition to the Federalist agenda would set the stage for the political battles that would define the future of the nation. But Washington's response to the Whiskey Rebellion remained a defining moment of his presidency, a moment in which he demonstrated that, while the country was still young and fragile, the United States would not tolerate rebellion against its laws or its government. By the end of his first term in office, George Washington had firmly established himself as the leader of the fledgling United States. His leadership during the Revolutionary War, the formation of the new government, and the challenges of domestic and foreign policy had made him an enduring figure of national importance. However, Washington, though widely revered, was conscious of the dangers of long-term power and the potential for the presidency to become too concentrated in one individual's hands. As he approached the end of his second term in office in 1796, Washington made the historic decision not to seek a third term, setting an essential precedent for the peaceful transfer of power in the United States. Washington's decision to retire from the presidency was a significant one. He had been the country's central figure, the embodiment of its unity and aspirations. The decision not to seek a third term, however, was made in the spirit of preserving the principles of the Republic and ensuring that the office of the president did not become a vehicle for unchecked power. Washington was fully aware of the risks that the office could pose to the Republic, particularly in light of the growing political divisions and the rise of partisan factions. By stepping down, he hoped to demonstrate that power was temporary and that the health of the nation depended on its ability to maintain a government of laws, not men. As Washington prepared to retire, he decided to leave a final message to the American people, his farewell address. The address, delivered in September 1796, would become one of the most significant documents in American political history. It was not a speech delivered in person, but rather a letter to the people of the United States, written by Washington and published in newspapers across the country. The farewell address was a reflection of Washington's wisdom, experience, and understanding of the fragility of the young republic. It was both a personal statement and a public guide to the future of the nation. In his farewell address, Washington focused on several key themes, the first of which was the importance of national unity. He warned the American people that political factions, what we now call political parties, could divide the nation and weaken its strength. Washington recognized that differing political opinions were natural, but he believed that party divisions could lead to the kind of factionalism that had plagued many European nations. He feared that parties would become vehicles for personal ambition and partisan loyalty rather than national interest. Washington's caution against political factions would resonate through American history, as the nation continued to grapple with the role of political parties in its democracy. Washington also expressed deep concern about the dangers of foreign entanglements. He believed that the United States, as a young and developing nation, should avoid becoming entangled in the complex alliances and rivalries of Europe. Washington's foreign policy had consistently emphasized neutrality, and in his farewell address, he reiterated that the United States should seek to avoid permanent alliances with foreign powers. He urged the nation to maintain its independence in foreign affairs, warning against being drawn into conflicts that were not directly in the United States' interests. His policy of neutrality would become a cornerstone of American foreign policy for much of the 19th century. Another key message in Washington's farewell address was his call for the American people to respect the Constitution and the rule of law. Washington emphasized the importance of maintaining the principles of republicanism and ensuring that the Constitution remained the guiding document of the nation. He warned against the dangers of disregarding the Constitution or altering its provisions for short-term political gain. Washington believed that the stability and future success of the United States depended on the adherence to the Constitution's principles and the protection of individual liberties, in addition to his warnings about political factions and foreign entanglements. Washington also urged the American people to foster a sense of civic virtue and public responsibility. He believed that a healthy republic depended on the moral character of its citizens. Washington stressed the importance of education, honesty, and integrity, arguing that a nation that valued these virtues would be able to govern itself effectively and justly. His call for civic virtue was a reminder that the success of the United States was not just a matter of laws and institutions, but of the people's commitment to the principles of liberty and equality. Washington's farewell address was not just a message about the future of the United States. It was also a reflection of his own beliefs and principles. The address was a testament to Washington's character, his commitment to the Republic, his humility, and his deep understanding of the nation's vulnerabilities. As Washington prepared to retire from public life, his farewell address offered a lasting legacy of wisdom that would continue to guide the United States for generations to come. While Washington's decision to retire was a personal one, it also had profound implications for the future of the presidency and American politics. By stepping down after 2 terms, Washington set an important precedent for the peaceful transfer of power, a cornerstone of American democracy. His decision demonstrated that the presidency was not a lifelong office, and that power would be transferred through elections, not through inheritance or force. This precedent would be followed by future presidents, ensuring that the United States would remain a republic governed by laws, not by individual rulers. Washington's farewell address also marked the end of an era. As he left the presidency, the United States stood at the threshold of a new chapter in its history. The nation was still young and many challenges lay ahead, but Washington's leadership had given the country a strong foundation, and his wisdom and vision had guided the fledgling republic through its most critical years. As he retired to Mount Vernon, Washington's legacy as the father of the nation was secure, and his message of unity, neutrality, and civic virtue continued to shape the course of American history. Washington's farewell address remains one of the most important documents in American political history. Its themes of unity, neutrality, and adherence to the Constitution continue to resonate with Americans today. Washington's leadership, both in war and in peace, had laid the groundwork for the success of the United States, and his farewell address was his final gift to the nation, a gift of guidance, wisdom, and an enduring vision of the American experiment. As George Washington retired from public life in 1797, he returned to his beloved Mount Vernon, leaving behind a nation still in its infancy, but already shaped by his leadership. The United States was a country with a fragile new constitution, struggling to define its place in the world. But Washington's impact on the fledgling republic was profound and lasting. His decision to step down voluntarily after 2 terms, his commitment to preserving the Republican ideals of the Revolution, and his dedication to national unity ensured that his legacy would be an enduring one. Even after his death in 1799, Washington's legacy remained central to the identity of the United States. He had been the country's first president and its first military leader, but more than that, he had been the symbol of the ideals the nation was founded upon: freedom, independence, and self-governance. These ideals were embodied in the very structure of the government he helped to create, which sought to establish a republic that would be accountable to its people, without the corruption of monarchy or despotism. Washington's influence extended far beyond his presidency and his military leadership. It was his embodiment of Republican virtues, his personal character, and his dedication to the public good that defined the spirit of the nation for generations. Washington's commitment to the idea of a government for and by the people was groundbreaking at the time, and it set the stage for the development of a democratic tradition that would continue to evolve. His insistence on the peaceful transfer of power and his voluntary retirement after 2 terms as president helped to prevent the creation of a monarchical system. The example of a president stepping down from power became one of the United States' defining features, and it set a standard that would be followed by every president who came after him, with the exception of Franklin D. Roosevelt, who served 4 terms. In terms of national unity, Washington's leadership was equally critical. He understood that the United States was a diverse and often divided country, and he worked tirelessly to bridge the gaps between different regions, factions, and interests. In his farewell address, he warned against the dangers of political parties, understanding that divisions based on party lines could undermine the unity of the nation. Though partisan politics eventually took root, Washington's call for unity still resonates today as a reminder of the potential damage that extreme political divisions can cause. Washington's diplomatic legacy was also essential to the development of the United States as an independent nation. His decision to adopt a policy of neutrality, particularly in regard to European conflicts, ensured that the United States could avoid entanglement in wars that might have destabilized the young country. Washington's leadership in foreign relations was pragmatic and cautious. He understood that the United States needed time to grow stronger before engaging in conflicts that did not directly concern its own security. This policy of neutrality, while not always popular, became a cornerstone of American foreign policy for much of the 19th century. Washington's understanding of the importance of avoiding foreign entanglements and focusing on domestic stability provided a template for subsequent presidents, particularly during the early years of the nation's history. Perhaps one of the most significant aspects of Washington's legacy was his unwavering commitment to the ideals of liberty and individual rights. Washington, like many of the Founding Fathers, believed that the government's role was to protect the rights of its citizens and to create the conditions necessary for individuals to pursue their own happiness and prosperity. This belief in liberty and personal freedom shaped not only Washington's policies, but also the very structure of the government he helped to establish. The Constitution, which Washington signed in 1787, and the Bill of Rights, which followed in 1791, were critical documents that enshrined these principles in the nation's legal framework. Washington's vision of a republic where power resided with the people, not a king or ruler, laid the foundation for the expansion of civil rights and liberties throughout American history. The creation of the U.S. Constitution and the establishment of the nation's political institutions were part of Washington's broader legacy. The federal system he helped to create provided the blueprint for a government in which power was divided between the national government and the states, with checks and balances to prevent any one branch from becoming too powerful. Washington's presidency, though focused on securing the country's domestic and foreign policies, also saw the growth of federal institutions that would shape the future of the nation. The establishment of the judiciary, the creation of the executive branch, and the crafting of a functioning economy all set precedents that would guide future generations of leaders. In the years after Washington's death, his legacy continued to shape the course of American history. The country he helped create became a beacon of liberty and democracy, influencing movements for independence and self-governance around the world. Washington's influence was felt not just in his own time, but throughout the centuries that followed. His reputation as a man of integrity, honor, and public service remained untarnished, and he was revered as the father of his country. Washington's legacy also continued to inspire leaders in the 19th and 20th centuries, particularly during times of crisis. His commitment to national unity and Republican principles was invoked by those seeking to preserve the Union during the Civil War, and his example was cited by leaders during both World Wars as a reminder of the nation's ideals. Washington's leadership in the early years of the United States his ability to navigate difficult challenges, and his dedication to creating a stable and just government made him a figure of enduring admiration. In the modern world, Washington's legacy continues to resonate. His example of public service, selflessness, and devotion to the common good remains a model for politicians and citizens alike. The United States, while vastly different from the nation Washington knew, continues to be shaped by the principles he helped to establish. The idea that the United States is a republic built on the ideals of liberty, equality, and justice owes much to Washington's vision and leadership. Today, Washington's influence can be seen in the many monuments and memorials dedicated to him, from the Washington Monument in the nation's capital to the countless schools, streets, and towns named in his honor. His image, often depicted on currency and in portraits, serves as a constant reminder of his contributions to the creation of the United States. Yet perhaps Washington's most enduring legacy is not found in physical monuments or symbolic gestures, but in the continued commitment of the American people to the ideals he espoused. As we reflect on Washington's life and legacy, it is clear that he remains one of the most significant figures in American history. His leadership, both in times of war and peace, helped to establish the United States as a nation dedicated to the principles of liberty, self-governance, and justice. Washington's vision for the future of the country was one that prioritized unity, independence, and a government that was accountable to the people. His impact on the course of American history is immeasurable, and his legacy continues to guide the nation as it moves forward. After serving 2 terms as the first President of the United States, George Washington retired to his beloved Mount Vernon in 1797. His decision to step down from the presidency was a powerful example of his commitment to Republican values and the principles of limited government. Washington had led the United States through its most formative years, securing independence from Great Britain, creating a framework for the new government, and guiding the country through its early challenges. But despite his significant achievements, Washington's journey was far from over. In the years following his presidency, he would continue to be a central figure in American life, though now in a different capacity. Upon his retirement, Washington was no longer involved in the day-to-day operations of the government, but his influence remained strong. His reputation as the father of the nation continued to grow, and his opinions were still highly valued by political leaders. Washington's retirement was not a retreat from public life. He remained a respected statesman, and many continued to look to him for guidance during times of national crisis. One of Washington's final acts as a public figure occurred in 1799, when the country was dealing with the issue of French aggression. Following the French Revolution, tensions had arisen between the United States and France, especially after the French had begun attacking American ships. This quasi-war was fought primarily on the seas, with both nations engaging in naval skirmishes. While President John Adams pursued diplomacy and avoided full-scale conflict, the country's future in foreign relations was uncertain. Washington, although retired, was called upon to serve as a commander again in the event of war. In response to the mounting tensions, Washington accepted the role of commander of the newly re-established army. Although the potential for war was ultimately avoided, Washington's willingness to return to military service at the age of 67 reflected his lifelong sense of duty to the country. But Washington's health was deteriorating. His final years were marked by increasing frailty. On December 12th, 1799, Washington became ill after a long day of supervising work on his estate. He developed a fever and a sore throat which quickly worsened. Despite the best efforts of his doctors, Washington's condition deteriorated rapidly. On the evening of December 14th, 1799, at the age of 67, George Washington passed away at Mount Vernon. The news of Washington's death was met with profound grief across the nation. People from all walks of life mourned the loss of their first president, their military leader, and their guiding figure. The nation had lost its most revered citizen, a man whose dedication to the principles of liberty, unity, and republicanism had shaped the very fabric of the country. In cities and towns across the United States, memorial services were held, and tributes poured in from every corner of the country. Washington's death marked the end of an era in which his leadership had steered the United States through its most formative and difficult years. In the years following his death, Washington's legacy only grew in importance. His role in the founding of the nation was celebrated, and his character was held up as the epitome of virtue and public service. Washington's voluntary decision to step down after 2 terms set a precedent for future presidents, establishing the norm of limited presidential terms and reinforcing the idea that no individual should hold too much power. His leadership had set the tone for the future of the presidency and the federal government, ensuring that the United States would remain a republic based on the principles of law and democratic governance. Washington's legacy also extended beyond the presidency. As the commander of the Continental Army, he had secured American independence, and his military leadership was recognized not only in the United States, but also abroad. Washington's victories in the Revolutionary War had helped to establish the United States as a sovereign nation, and his leadership during the war ensured that the principles of freedom and self-government would be preserved. Washington's commitment to national unity was another hallmark of his legacy. Throughout his presidency, he had worked to balance the needs and interests of different regions and factions, understanding that the survival of the nation depended on its ability to remain united. He had faced challenges from political factions, particularly the rise of partisan politics between the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, but he had always sought to place the interests of the nation above political divisions. His farewell address in 1796, in which he warned against the dangers of political parties and foreign entanglements, remains one of the most important documents in American political history. It reflected Washington's vision for a country that would remain committed to unity, neutrality, and the rule of law. Washington's legacy also had a profound impact on future generations. The example he set as a leader, one who prioritized service to the nation over personal ambition, who adhered to the principles of democracy and republicanism, and who put the needs of the country before his own, became the standard for future presidents. Washington was the first president, but his actions set the course for all those who would follow. His voluntary departure from power established the peaceful transfer of authority as a key characteristic of American democracy, and his example of humility and selflessness became an enduring symbol of American values. In addition to his political and military achievements, Washington's personal character was central to his legacy. He was a man of great integrity, discipline, and personal honor. He faced numerous challenges throughout his life, from the hardships of war to the difficulties of governing a young nation, but he always approached each challenge with a sense of duty and responsibility. Washington was not driven by the desire for personal glory. Rather, he saw his leadership as a service to the country and to the principles of liberty. His reputation for honesty and his commitment to the public good made him a revered figure both in his time and in the years that followed. Even in the modern world, Washington's legacy endures. He's remembered as one of the founding fathers of the United States, and his contributions to the creation of the nation are still celebrated today. Monuments, memorials, and institutions bear his name, and his image continues to appear on American currency. Washington's influence can be seen in the values of freedom, democracy, and republicanism that continue to define the United States. Washington's life and legacy remind us of the importance of selfless leadership, national unity, and the enduring principles of liberty. His story is one of perseverance, service, and dedication to the cause of independence. As the United States continues to grow and evolve, Washington's example remains a guiding light, a model of leadership that transcends time and continues to inspire those who serve the public good. George Washington's influence on the formation and development of the United States is immeasurable. His leadership in both military and political realms, his character, and his enduring commitment to the principles of liberty, democracy, and republicanism left a lasting imprint on the young nation. Washington did not just serve as its first president or as the commander-in-chief during the Revolutionary War. He was the very embodiment of the American ideal. His legacy, forged through the challenges of war, governance, and the establishment of the new republic, became the foundation upon which future generations of Americans would build. Washington's place in American history is unique. As the first president of the United States, he not only served as the nation's first head of state, but also as a model for future leaders. His voluntary decision to relinquish power after 2 terms set a precedent that would become a fundamental aspect of American democracy, the peaceful transfer of power. By stepping down, Washington demonstrated that no individual, not even the most revered leader, should hold power indefinitely. This precedent, established in 1797, remains one of the defining characteristics of the American political system, and it continues to influence political practices around the world. The legacy of Washington's leadership was not confined to his own time. His example of public service, his commitment to the values of freedom and independence, and his belief in the importance of a government by the people all shaped the future of the United States. Washington's leadership during the Revolution had helped to secure American independence, but his role in the founding of the nation as a stable republic was equally important. In a world where monarchies and autocracies were the norm, Washington's republican ideals were revolutionary. He understood that the success of the United States depended on its ability to create a government that was accountable to the people, one that protected individual rights and promoted the general welfare. One of Washington's most enduring legacies is his belief in national unity. Throughout his presidency and the years following his service, Washington understood the importance of keeping the country united, particularly in the face of political divisions. In his farewell address, Washington warned against the dangers of political parties, recognizing that divisive factionalism could tear apart the fragile bonds of the new republic. His call for unity resonated deeply with Americans at the time, and has remained a touchstone for leaders and citizens alike. While political parties would inevitably emerge, Washington's warning about the destructive potential of party divisions remains relevant to this day. Washington's presidency was marked by efforts to unite a diverse nation under the principles of the Constitution. His policies helped lay the groundwork for the establishment of a stable, functional federal government, balancing the power between the federal and state authorities. Washington's careful navigation of foreign policy, his decision to avoid European entanglements, and his stance of neutrality in conflicts like the French Revolution ensured that the United States would have the time and space it needed to grow and strengthen before engaging in larger global conflicts. These policies would set the stage for the next several decades of American foreign relations. Washington's military legacy is another key element of his historical significance. As the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War, he transformed a group of poorly trained militias into a disciplined fighting force capable of defeating the British, the world's most powerful military at the time. Washington's leadership during critical moments of the war, such as the crossing of the Delaware River and the victory at the Battle of Trenton, demonstrated his ability to inspire and lead under pressure. His decision-making during the harsh winter at Valley Forge, where he kept his army together and focused on training and discipline, was crucial in preparing his troops for future success. Washington's military career not only ensured American independence, but also set a model for future military leaders, emphasizing strategic thinking, perseverance, and the importance of morale in warfare. In addition to his military and political leadership, Washington's personal character and sense of duty are central to his place in American history. Throughout his life, Washington remained committed to the ideals of public service. He was not driven by personal ambition or the desire for power. Rather, he saw his leadership as a sacred duty to the people and the principles of liberty. His personal integrity, his commitment to justice, and his willingness to sacrifice for the good of the nation set him apart from other leaders. Washington's humility and his sense of responsibility to the American people were qualities that endeared him to the citizens of the new republic and earned him the title of the Father of his country. Washington's influence on future American leaders cannot be overstated. His example as a leader who prioritized the national interest over personal gain, his commitment to a balanced and accountable government, and his belief in the importance of maintaining the nation's unity and independence have inspired generations of Americans. His legacy as a leader who embodied the best qualities of public service continues to serve as a guiding light for politicians, military leaders, and citizens alike. In the 19th and 20th centuries, Washington's memory was honored through the establishment of numerous monuments, statues, and institutions bearing his name. The Washington Monument in the nation's capital remains one of the most recognizable symbols of his legacy, standing tall as a tribute to the man who helped build the United States. His image has appeared on American currency, and his influence can be felt in every aspect of American life, from government to culture to national identity. Washington's commitment to national unity, Republican values, and the principles of liberty has continued to shape the political landscape of the United States. Washington's legacy also extended beyond the borders of the United States. His leadership during the Revolutionary War and his role in establishing a democratic republic have made him a symbol of freedom and self-governance for people around the world. The principles he championed during his lifetime, freedom, independence, unity, and democracy, continue to inspire movements for liberty in other nations. Despite the passage of time, Washington's place in American history remains secure. His example as a leader who served with integrity, who sacrificed personal power for the good of the nation, and who helped to create a government based on the principles of the Constitution, continues to influence and inspire Americans. His vision of a republic governed by laws, where the power rests with the people and not with a monarch, remains the bedrock of American democracy. Washington's life and legacy are a reminder of the strength and resilience of the United States, and his influence will continue to be felt as the country faces the challenges of the future. George Washington's legacy is not only marked by his leadership in the Revolutionary War and his presidency, but also by his vision for the future of the United States. As the first president, Washington's primary concern was to establish a stable and sustainable foundation for the young nation. He understood that the principles upon which the United States was founded, freedom, democracy, and self-governance, would require constant care and attention. Washington's vision for the United States encompassed not only the present but also the future. He believed that the country's success depended on its ability to avoid the pitfalls of past republics and to build a government that could balance power, protect individual rights, and unite the country in pursuit of the common good. One of Washington's most enduring contributions was his emphasis on national unity. He understood that the United States was a collection of diverse states with different economies, cultures, and interests, but he believed that the strength of the country lay in its ability to maintain unity in the face of internal and external challenges. In his farewell address, Washington famously warned against the dangers of political parties and factionalism, believing that division would weaken the republic and make it vulnerable to external forces. He saw political parties as a threat to national cohesion, as they would encourage partisanship over patriotism and self-interest over the common good. Washington's warning about political parties, though largely unheeded in his time, remains relevant to this day. The rise of partisan politics in the early years of the Republic led to the formation of the Federalist and Democratic Republican parties, and political factions have continued to shape the political landscape of the United States ever since. However, Washington's call for national unity is still echoed by leaders who seek to bring the country together in times of division, reminding Americans of the importance of working toward common goals despite political differences. Another key aspect of Washington's vision was his belief in a government based on the rule of law. As the first president, Washington worked to establish the principles of governance that would ensure the survival of the American Republic. He understood that the United States could not thrive without a system of laws that protected individual rights, ensured justice, and maintained order. Washington's commitment to the Constitution was unwavering, and he worked to ensure that the new government operated within its framework. His example set a standard for future leaders, one that prioritized the Constitution as the supreme law of the land, and ensured that the government would be held accountable to the people it served. Washington also saw the importance of a strong and effective national government. While he was deeply committed to Republican ideals and the notion of limited government, he understood that a government capable of defending the nation, promoting economic stability, and maintaining peace required certain powers and resources. This was evident in his support for the establishment of a national bank, the creation of a national currency, and the strengthening of the federal government's ability to tax and regulate commerce. Washington was a pragmatic leader who understood that the success of the United States depended on the federal government's ability to function effectively, especially in a world where foreign powers could threaten the nation's independence. Washington's foreign policy vision was also forward-looking. His policy of neutrality, which he articulated in his farewell address, was designed to keep the United States out of the entanglements of European wars and conflicts. Washington recognized that the United States was not yet strong enough to engage in European power struggles, and that its best course of action was to remain independent from foreign alliances. He believed that the United States should focus on its own development and security, avoiding the alliances and entanglements that had drawn other nations into costly wars. Washington's foreign policy vision would guide American diplomacy for much of the 19th century, and laid the groundwork for the nation's eventual emergence as a global power. Beyond foreign policy, Washington's vision for the United States included the idea of westward expansion. While he did not live to see it, Washington was a strong proponent of the idea that the United States should grow and spread across the continent. He understood that the land to the west of the original 13 colonies was rich with potential, and he saw the expansion of the United States as a way to secure the nation's future and solidify its independence. Washington's legacy lived on in the policies that encouraged westward expansion, such as the Louisiana Purchase in 1803 and the subsequent settlement of the frontier. His vision of a growing and self-sufficient nation was realized in the decades following his death. As the United States spread across the continent and became a global economic and political power, Washington's commitment to education and the development of civic virtue was also part of his broader vision for the nation. He believed that a republic could only thrive if its citizens were informed, engaged, and virtuous. Washington's emphasis on education was not just about formal schooling, but about the need for citizens to be educated in the principles of liberty, the responsibilities of self-governance, and the importance of public service. He believed that the health of the nation depended on the moral character of its citizens, and he sought to instill these values in the American people through his actions and his words. Washington's call for an educated and virtuous citizenry remains a guiding principle for the United States, one that continues to be echoed by leaders who recognize the importance of civic engagement and personal responsibility. Washington's vision for the United States was one of unity, stability, and progress. He sought to create a government that was responsive to the needs of its people, that protected their rights and freedoms, and that could stand strong in the face of external threats. His leadership helped to ensure that the country's principles of liberty and democracy would endure, even in the face of challenges and divisions. Washington's vision for the United States was not just about political structures or military victories. It was about creating a society where freedom, justice, and opportunity were available to all citizens, and where the government was accountable to the people it served. As the United States moved into the 19th century, Washington's vision continued to guide the country. His commitment to national unity, his belief in the importance of a strong but limited government, and his emphasis on the rule of law helped to shape the nation's identity and its future. Washington's leadership provided the foundation for the United States to grow and evolve, and his legacy continued to influence the leaders who came after him. The United States, as it faced new challenges and opportunities, could look back to Washington's example as a model of how to navigate the complexities of nation-building and to stay true to the principles upon which the country was founded. Though George Washington's life came to a close in 1799, the principles and ideals he championed have continued to shape the United States in profound and lasting ways. The first President of the United States, Washington's influence extended far beyond the duration of his presidency. His actions set critical precedents for the future of the country, and the political, social, and moral values he held dear were woven into the fabric of American governance and identity. One of Washington's most enduring contributions was his insistence on setting examples of leadership that prioritized the nation's interests over personal gain. Throughout his military career and later as president, Washington was guided by a sense of duty to the country. He was deeply committed to the Republican ideals that had motivated the American Revolution, believing that the success of the United States depended on its leaders' willingness to sacrifice personal power and wealth for the common good. This dedication to public service became a model for future leaders of the United States. Washington's decision to voluntarily relinquish power after 2 terms in office set an important precedent for the peaceful transfer of power, a cornerstone of American democracy. His decision reinforced the principle that no individual should hold excessive power, not even the president. The idea of a limited presidency, governed by the will of the people and subject to elections, became one of the defining features of the American political system. Washington's voluntary departure from the presidency helped establish the tradition of a 2-term limit, which would eventually be codified in the 22nd Amendment in 1951. Even after Washington left office, his influence remained vital in shaping the political course of the United States. His warnings against political parties, made in his farewell address, continued to echo through American political life. Washington recognized the potential dangers of factionalism and political division, which he believed could fragment the country and weaken its democratic institutions. His vision of a unified nation, with political parties serving the broader interest of the Republic rather than dividing the populace, was one that would not always be realized in practice. Political parties eventually became a fixture of American political life, but Washington's warning remains a powerful reminder of the risks of polarization. Washington's vision of a national unity also extended to foreign policy. Throughout his presidency, Washington sought to avoid entanglements in European conflicts, striving for a neutral stance in the face of the ongoing wars between France and Great Britain. His policy of neutrality was not only about avoiding foreign alliances, but also about allowing the United States to focus on its own development and security. Washington's diplomatic stance of neutrality and his commitment to protecting American sovereignty set the stage for American foreign policy for much of the 19th century. His example of a cautious, pragmatic approach to international relations continued to influence the country's diplomatic actions. particularly in the early years of the Republic. Washington's approach to foreign relations also set the tone for the United States' role in the world. His decision to prioritize the nation's independence and self-sufficiency, rather than engaging in external power struggles, helped solidify the idea of the United States as a nation apart from the old world of European monarchies. His leadership created a sense of national pride and identity that transcended geographic boundaries. The idea of America as a beacon of liberty and a model of self-governance resonated deeply, influencing both the nation's future interactions with the rest of the world and its own internal political development. Washington's influence extended to the institutions of government that he helped to establish. As the first president, he shaped the office in ways that have endured to the present day. Washington worked closely with Congress to ensure that the new government functioned smoothly, and he established the executive office as a critical branch of government. The cabinet system he created, where key advisors were selected to help him navigate the challenges of governance, has been continued by every president who followed him. Washington's careful management of the executive branch ensured that it would play an important role in the separation of powers envisioned by the framers of the Constitution. In addition to shaping the presidency, Washington's influence extended to the development of American political philosophy. His commitment to Republican ideals and constitutional governance helped solidify the principles of democracy that would be reflected in the Bill of Rights and the broader body of American political thought. Washington believed that a healthy republic depended on the moral and civic virtue of its citizens. He encouraged a sense of responsibility among the people and the leaders, emphasizing that the United States' success would depend on individuals' dedication to public service, respect for the rule of law, and a willingness to put the nation's interests ahead of partisan concerns. This vision of an engaged and morally upright citizenry continued to influence American political life for generations. Washington's influence also resonated beyond the borders of the United States. As the first leader of a successful revolution against a European power, Washington became an inspiration to other nations seeking self-determination and independence. His leadership during the American Revolution and his role in the establishment of a democratic republic served as a model for other countries aspiring to break free from colonial rule or authoritarian regimes. Washington's example helped shape revolutionary movements around the world, and his status as the father of his country made him a universal symbol of liberty and republicanism. Even in the modern world, Washington's influence remains a powerful force in American culture and politics. His example of selfless public service continues to inspire leaders and citizens alike. In times of national crisis, Washington's leadership style, marked by a calm and steady hand, a commitment to the principles of unity, and a focus on the long-term good, has often been invoked as a model of how to guide the nation through challenging times. Washington's legacy is not just found in the monuments and memorials dedicated to him, but in the ideals and principles that he helped to establish and that continue to define the United States. Washington's role as a unifying figure, both during and after his presidency, cannot be overstated. His leadership helped to shape a new nation, one that was committed to the principles of liberty, democracy, and self-governance. The United States that emerged from the Revolution was not just a new political entity, but a symbol of what could be achieved through unity, sacrifice, and a commitment to Republican ideals. Washington's legacy of leadership, selflessness, and unwavering dedication to the public good laid the foundation for the country's future success and continued to shape the nation's identity for generations. As the end of George Washington's second term approached, his leadership had already shaped the foundation of the United States in ways that would endure for generations. Despite his deep sense of duty, Washington had long made it clear that he did not seek personal power, and felt the time had come for him to step aside. His voluntary decision not to seek a third term became one of the most important precedents in American political life, reinforcing the principle that no individual, however revered, should hold unchecked power for too long. As Washington prepared to leave office in 1797, the young nation he had helped to establish was still navigating a variety of challenges. The fledgling United States had a young, developing economy, internal political divisions, and potential threats abroad, particularly from Europe. But Washington's leadership, both as president and as commander-in-chief during the Revolutionary War, had given the country stability and direction. His efforts had solidified the ideals of republicanism and constitutional governance, and his administration had laid the groundwork for the country's future success. The conclusion of Washington's presidency marked a pivotal moment in American history, as it represented the end of an era. Washington was not just the first president. He was the symbol of the nation's independence, the embodiment of the virtues of liberty and self-governance, and the foundational figure of the United States. But his retirement in 1797 was a signal of a broader commitment to the principles of democracy and constitutional governance that he had championed. In his farewell address, delivered in September 1796, Washington offered his final words of guidance to the American people. His address, though brief, was filled with profound wisdom about the future of the United States and the dangers it might face. Washington used the opportunity to caution against the rise of political parties, which he feared could divide the nation and hinder its ability to govern effectively. He warned against becoming entangled in the conflicts of Europe, advocating instead for a foreign policy based on neutrality that would allow the United States to focus on its own development. Washington's call for unity, both at home and abroad, served as a timeless reminder of the values that had made the United States unique in the world. Its commitment to Republican ideals, its desire for national harmony, and its determination to avoid the wars and alliances that could destabilize the young nation. Washington's decision to retire from public life was not only an act of personal choice, but also a powerful statement about the nature of the American Republic. His leadership had set a standard for future presidents, not just in terms of their conduct in office, but in their approach to power. Washington's voluntary departure from the presidency helped to ensure that the office of the president would not become a lifetime appointment or a source of authoritarian rule. His commitment to a government of laws, not men, became one of the defining features of the American political system. His leadership, built on a foundation of public service and civic responsibility, would influence not only his successors, but also the entire nation's approach to democracy. Washington's retirement was a time for reflection on his monumental achievements. After 2 terms as president, he returned to Mount Vernon, where he could once again focus on his estate and his family. His retirement was not marked by idleness, rather he continued to manage his land, oversee agricultural operations, and fulfill his responsibilities as a gentleman farmer. He was also keenly aware of the political landscape, even from his home in Virginia. Washington remained a respected figure in the country, and his opinion continued to carry great weight. Though he had formally retired from public life, his influence was far from over. Washington was still regarded as the father of the nation, and his example continued to inspire future generations of leaders. In the years following his retirement, Washington's health began to decline. By December 1799, his condition had worsened, and he fell ill after spending a day in the cold weather at Mount Vernon. His doctors, though attentive, were unable to reverse his condition, and Washington passed away on December 14, 1799, at the age of 67. His death was met with an outpouring of grief across the nation. People from all walks of life mourned the loss of their first president, the man who had led them through their most trying times and had shaped the nation in ways that would continue to resonate for centuries. Washington's death marked the end of an era, but it also set in motion a period of national reflection. His leadership, grounded in Republican principles, had created a legacy that would endure through generations of Americans. His passing left the country without its central unifying figure, and the nation would soon grapple with the political divisions that would define the future of American democracy. But the principles Washington had established, the importance of unity, the rule of law, and the peaceful transfer of power, remained as pillars of the Republic. As the United States continued to grow and evolve, Washington's legacy continued to inspire leaders and citizens alike. His decision to retire after 2 terms in office, his commitment to the Constitution, and his focus on national unity set the standard for future generations. Washington's leadership style, marked by his careful balance of power, his focus on the public good, and his willingness to step aside when his work was done, provided an enduring example for future American presidents. His farewell address became a guide for politicians, reminding them of the dangers of political factions, the importance of neutrality in foreign policy, and the need to protect the Republic from the concentration of power. Washington's legacy also extended beyond his presidency. He remained a symbol of the American spirit, resilient, virtuous, and dedicated to the principles of liberty and justice. The Washington Monument in the nation's capital stands as a reminder of his contributions to the country. His name is carried on by countless institutions, streets, and landmarks across the United States, each one a testament to the enduring power of his example. Washington's image remains iconic, gracing the nation's currency and public spaces, a constant reminder of the man who helped shape the United States into the country it is today. As we look back on Washington's life and leadership, it is clear that his influence continues to reverberate through American history. His dedication to public service, his commitment to unity, and his devotion to the principles of liberty and democracy laid the foundation for the United States to grow into a global power. Washington's example of leadership has remained a touchstone for all those who serve the public good. His legacy lives on not only in the monuments and institutions dedicated to him, but in the values that continue to guide the United States. George Washington's place in the history of the United States has evolved over time, transcending the figure of the first president to become something of a national myth. While Washington's actual accomplishments in war and governance laid the foundation for the nation, his legacy soon transformed into something much more. Over the course of the 19th and 20th centuries, Washington's image was carefully shaped and cultivated into that of an idealized, almost mythical figure. His life, leadership, and character were used to define American identity, and his memory was cherished as the embodiment of virtue, selflessness, and unity. Washington's transformation into a national myth began during his lifetime, as his contemporaries recognized his unparalleled contributions to the establishment of the United States. Following his death in 1799, his image quickly began to serve as a symbol of the values on which the nation was founded. As the first president, the man who had led the country to independence, and the leader who had voluntarily relinquished power, Washington became an ideal of republicanism, democracy, and civic virtue. The legend of Washington was particularly important as the United States struggled to define itself in the early years of the 19th century, especially after the War of 1812, when the nation faced continued political and military challenges. By the early 19th century, Washington had become a revered figure. Artists and writers of the period began to shape Washington's legacy as an almost mythical leader. The portrayal of Washington in art and literature began to emphasize his character, his leadership, and his sacrifices for the nation. His image was depicted as that of a wise, moral leader, one who had fought not for personal glory but for the survival and prosperity of the nation. He was frequently depicted as a man of noble character, someone whose decision-making was guided by a deep sense of responsibility to the public good. His ability to rise above personal ambition became a cornerstone of the myth of Washington. The most famous example of this idealization came with the story of Washington and the cherry tree. The legend, which claims that a young Washington confessed to chopping down a cherry tree with the famous line, "I cannot tell a lie," served to reinforce the notion of Washington's unparalleled honesty and integrity. While there is no evidence to suggest that this story is true, it became widely accepted as part of Washington's mythic persona. The cherry tree story, more than any other anecdote, became a shorthand for Washington's moral uprightness, serving to highlight his devotion to truth and honor. In addition to these popular myths, Washington's leadership was elevated through the construction of monumental structures dedicated to him. One of the most iconic symbols of Washington's enduring legacy is the Washington Monument, a towering obelisk that stands in the heart of the nation's capital. Completed in 1884, the Washington Monument serves not only as a physical reminder of his contributions to the founding of the United States, but also as a representation of his towering place in the American imagination. As Americans look toward the future, Washington's figure became a point of reverence, an ideal that they could look back to when grappling with the country's evolving identity. Washington's myth also took on a prominent role during times of national crisis. In the aftermath of the Civil War, as the nation sought to rebuild and redefine its sense of unity, Washington's image was invoked to remind Americans of the values of freedom, equality, and union. His commitment to the Republic and his ability to rise above partisan divisions made him an enduring symbol of the unity that the country needed after the divisions of the war. Both the Union and the Confederacy appealed to Washington's example, seeing him as the embodiment of a shared American identity, despite the deep divisions that had torn the country apart. In the 20th century, as the United States became a global superpower, Washington's image continued to be elevated, though it was now framed in the context of the United States' role in world affairs. His leadership, which had ensured the survival and success of the Republic, was reinterpreted as the foundation for the United States' expansion of democratic principles abroad. Washington's commitment to freedom and self-governance, once seen primarily in the context of a new nation, was now projected onto the global stage as part of the narrative of the United States' ideological struggle against tyranny. By the time of Washington's bicentennial in 1932, his place in American culture had solidified. Celebrations of his life and legacy were used to promote national pride and unity, drawing on the myth of Washington as an ideal leader. However, Washington's mythological status also raised questions about how the United States would interpret its past. The idealized image of Washington, free from any moral or political shortcomings, was increasingly at odds with modern understandings of history, which began to emphasize the complexity of historical figures and the challenges of reconciling idealized images with the reality of the time. Over the years, scholars and historians have continued to grapple with Washington's legacy, presenting a more nuanced picture of the man behind the myth. While Washington's leadership in the Revolutionary War and the establishment of the U.S. government is undeniably monumental, his personal life and views have become subjects of critical inquiry. Washington's ownership of slaves, for example, has prompted ongoing debate over his legacy, as his participation in and acceptance of slavery conflicted with the ideals of freedom and liberty that he championed. These aspects of Washington's life challenge the simplified image of him as a flawless and infallible leader. While Washington's contributions to the founding of the United States remain unquestionable, the examination of his actions within the broader context of American history and his complicated relationship with slavery has reshaped the narrative of his legacy. The myth of Washington as an almost saintly figure has given way to a more multifaceted understanding of his life and actions. Today, Washington is still revered as a founding father, but his legacy is now more thoroughly examined and critically engaged with. Modern scholars emphasize both the positive and negative aspects of his life, recognizing his role as a key architect of the American Republic, while also acknowledging the contradictions inherent in his actions and beliefs. Despite these complexities, Washington's role in the creation of the United States remains central to the country's identity. His vision for a government of laws, his commitment to unity, and his belief in liberty and republicanism continue to be foundational principles for the nation. Washington's legacy, as both a historical figure and a symbol of the American experiment, remains as relevant today as it was during his lifetime. His myth, while evolving, continues to inspire those who seek to understand the principles that have guided the United States and to carry forward the ideals for which he stood. As we reach the final segment of this series on George Washington, it is important to reflect on the enduring vision he set forth for the United States, a vision that continues to influence the country to this day. Washington's leadership, both in the Revolutionary War and as the first president, laid the foundation for the United States as a democratic republic, committed to liberty, justice, and the rule of law. His legacy is not just that of a military leader or the first president. It is the legacy of a nation builder who sought to create a government that would serve the people, protect their rights, and secure the blessings of liberty for future generations. Washington's belief in national unity was perhaps his most enduring and important legacy. From the beginning of the Revolution to the end of his presidency, Washington understood that the strength of the United States depended on the ability to unite people with diverse interests, backgrounds, and regions. His leadership was defined by his commitment to holding the country together, even in the face of internal divisions and external threats. Washington's leadership was not about fostering divisions for political gain, but about creating a government that could bring people together for the common good. His farewell address, in which he warned against the dangers of political parties and foreign entanglements, reflected his deep concern for the nation's unity and stability. The example Washington set during his presidency, particularly his decision to step down after 2 terms, was a powerful testament to his understanding of the dangers of concentrated power. By voluntarily relinquishing power, Washington ensured that the office of the president would not become a permanent position held by one person, and he set a precedent for future presidents to follow. This commitment to the peaceful transfer of power became one of the most important cornerstones of American democracy, and is one of Washington's most lasting contributions to the nation. Washington's vision for the United States was also grounded in his belief in the rule of law. As the leader of the Continental Army, he had fought for the cause of liberty and independence, and as president, he worked to ensure that the new government would be guided by the principles of the Constitution. His belief in the importance of the Constitution was evident in his actions and decisions throughout his presidency. Washington recognized that the strength of the United States lay not just in its military power or political influence, but in the ability to create a government that was grounded in the rule of law, one that respected the rights of individuals and protected the common good. While Washington's vision for the United States was centered around national unity and the rule of law, it was also rooted in the idea of a government that was responsive to the needs of the people. Washington understood that the American experiment was fragile, and that the success of the Republic depended on the ability of its leaders to govern with integrity and wisdom. Throughout his presidency, Washington sought to balance the needs of different regions and political factions, recognizing that the country's diversity could be a strength if the government was able to create policies that served the common good. His commitment to this vision of a government that worked for all Americans remains a guiding principle of the United States. Washington's foreign policy vision, particularly his policy of neutrality, was also central to his overall vision for the United States. He understood that the country was still young and vulnerable, and he believed that the best way to secure its future was to avoid entanglements in foreign conflicts. Washington's decision to avoid permanent alliances with European powers articulated in his farewell address. set the tone for American foreign policy for much of the 19th century. While the world changed around the United States, Washington's vision of a neutral, independent country would continue to shape American diplomacy for generations to come. In addition to his political and military achievements, Washington's personal character was central to his vision for the United States. He believed that the strength of the nation depended not just on its political institutions, but on the moral character of its people. Washington's commitment to civic virtue and public service was evident in his own life. He was a man who placed duty to his country above personal ambition, and he believed that the success of the United States would depend on the integrity of its citizens. This vision of a nation founded on the principles of virtue, self-governance, and responsibility continues to inspire Americans today. In the years following Washington's death, his legacy continued to grow. He was remembered not only as the first president and a military leader, but as the symbol of the nation's founding ideals. Monuments and memorials were erected in his honor, and his image became an enduring part of American identity. Washington's leadership, vision, and character were celebrated as the foundation upon which the United States was built. His place in history was solidified as the man who had not only helped win the war for independence, but who had also built the framework for the government that would serve the people and protect their rights for generations to come. Even as the United States evolved and faced new challenges, Washington's example continued to guide the nation. In times of national crisis, Washington's leadership and dedication to unity and the common good were often invoked as a reminder of the principles that had guided the nation's founders. His legacy as a leader who prioritized service to the public over personal ambition, who believed in the importance of a balanced government, and who set the standard for presidential conduct, remained a touchstone for American political life. Today, George Washington's vision for the United States continues to resonate. His commitment to the principles of democracy, liberty, and national unity serves as a reminder of the values that continue to define the nation. Washington's leadership in the face of adversity, his unwavering belief in the Republic, and his dedication to the common good are qualities that are still revered in American political thought. As the United States continues to face new challenges in an ever-changing world, Washington's vision for the country remains as relevant as ever, providing a foundation for future leaders to build upon.